Okay, well, we've got it in place for the first of the provocations, which is the
Yeah,
most significant piece
yeah.
here. So with that, I want to introduce the first of our provocateurs, Michael Milligan. And Michael is the CEO of ABET, which is the global accreditation body for colleges and universities for engineering programs. There's over 4,500 institutions that are part of that network that ABET works with in terms of doing that work. Michael has a background of as a PhD in electrical engineering, but an extensive background in industry, working, on projects with NASA, with NOAA, and other things, and has been, in a leadership role for ABET for some time. And so we really appreciate his ability to give us that first sort of global big picture perspective about the potential of sustainability as a transformative force in engineering education. So Michael, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, very good. Well, thanks, Val. And thanks for all of you for being here. I have to admit, this is the first time I've ever actually been invited to be a provocateur, so hopefully I'll do a good job at that. As Kyle mentioned, I'm the CEO of ABET, and ABET is an organization. I'm going to start sharing my screen here. Is an organization that's really helping develop the next generation of problem solvers. Those students that are going to go off and tackle these many complex problems that we have that are facing our planet. And so I've been really focused on this particular topic for a number of years now, and I want to kind of describe our role in achieving that. So everybody can see my screen, correct? Just making sure. Yep. Okay. All right. So here's kind of where I feel that ABET has a role to play. So I think we're uniquely positioned based on our global reach. In addition to those 4,500 programs that Kyle mentioned, we have multiple relationships with organizations, other accrediting bodies around the world. So I think we have a really unique opportunity to really drive sustainability concepts into undergraduate engineering education. And we want to do it in a way that when the students come out of their programs, that's the way they think. Okay, it's not something that's going to add on to the program, but rather we really see this as something that's going to be integrated into their educational experience. Now, one of the things I like to do, of course, is talk about sustainable development goals. These are excellent. This is an excellent way to kind of address this issue. So I kind of want to set the stage a little bit, and then I'll talk specifically about the ABET's role and so forth. But I'm sure you've seen these before. They've been described to me from some of my colleagues as really sort of a really nice way to kind of break down sustainability into sort of workable areas. And you can see, sustainability in itself is such a daunting sort of topic, but when you can start talking about, climate action, or you're talking about life on land or quality education and so forth, it really gives you an opportunity to focus and to not only kind of again, focus your energies, but also track progress. Now, there are reports that come out from the United Nations every year that talk about how well we're doing in meeting these goals. And of course, time is not on our side. I think everybody understands that, especially with some of the more critical SDGs. But they do give us an opportunity to not only track our progress, but also where do we need to refocus our energies. There's numbers of agencies that kind of pull all this data together, and you can see lots of red on this chart. And the one, of course, that's the biggest issue really facing us right now, I think, is climate action and what's happening with the the temperature of our planet and so forth, because unless we get that one solved, we're going to be in big trouble. So again, the UN says, the climate change is of all of the 17 SDGs is the one that they kind of classified as code red, meaning we really got to get moving on this. We know the climate's our Earth is warming rapidly. The data supports that. There's no disputing this, and there's really no disputing that the cause of it is really human activity. So how do we change all of that? And unfortunately, the activity part is the hard part, because that's tied much to human behavior. And of course, human behavior is a difficult thing to modify. Of course, the water stress also, and we read about this every day all over the world, the United States, of course, but also in other parts. And this is only going to get worse and worse because, again, the two are linked together. And, we need to get students coming out of our programs to kind of, hey, this is what they want, this is what they value, this is what they want to address, right? All right, so when I talk about these things, it's easy to talk about doom and gloom, but I think it's also important to talk a little bit about progress. One of the SDGs that we have is sustainable energy, and we have made progress in that. You can see from this chart, electrification is pretty well established in many parts of the world, but not all parts of the world. So while we've been doing good at renewables and so forth, we have a ways to go, but this is positive. This is trending in a positive direction. And I think it's important to recognize that, especially when we get our students engaged, because if you hand them a sort of the issue for them is, hey, the world is, disintegrating. You got to save us. You need to be able to demonstrate their progress is being made so they can have a positive influence and make a positive contributions. And clearly that's happening. We see electrification of automobiles, of course, which goes a long ways to reducing greenhouse emissions. Same thing with trucks. So many trucks in the world carrying so much cargo and so forth. Shipping too. This is a great example of a ship that's as it says here, a zero emission. It runs on a 13-kilometer route, so not very long route in Norway, and it transfers fertilizer and chemicals between two ports. But the key thing here is it replaces somewhere near 40,000 trucks would have had to make a transition between those two ports, and actually even longer than 13 kilometers to transfer the same amount of materials. But the point here is that this is a technology that's been demonstrated to be successful, and why can't we just expand this now worldwide? This is always an interesting thing. We have, we're so tied to our cell phones, our mobile devices and so forth. It was 15 years ago, people didn't even have them. Now we're throwing away 5 billion a year. It's kind of crazy. And of course, the key thing here is the lithium. We like lithium, and it has a lot of benefits, of course, in terms of energy storage, but it also has a lot of negative consequences in terms of how do we get lithium out of the earth. And just in this case here in Nevada, there's something like 17,000 claims that have been laid down across that state looking for lithium. And, there's going to be a lot of potential conflicts in this case with the native lands and so forth. But this is all around the world and not just in the US. Of course, good example, life under sea. In 2 years, we lost something like 11 billion crabs. We don't know where they went. And it turns out that we see the same sort of effects everywhere around the world in terms of, losing coral reefs and so forth. And really what it's tied to is two things: acidification. The ocean covers about 70% of the land mass, or the mass of the Earth, which is obviously huge, but has a real great benefit of absorbing carbon dioxide. But as a result of that, of course, the water becomes more acidic, and as a result, it damages life underwater. The temperatures are also rising considerably, which again actually is tied to the case, I think, of these king crabs in the Bering Sea disappearing. So we always like to talk about systems of systems in engineering. That's a common term that we hear about. And I can tell you that probably biodiversity is one of our most complex systems of systems. And I would argue one of the most important, because our lives depend on it. And without a healthy biodiversity, we are going to have a really hard time continuing on as a species. So it's pretty straightforward. Of course, the influences here is the human population growth. How do we manage that and still respect the natural resources? We consume so much from the earth. How can we reduce that, do it in a way that's sustainable, and then, of course, being much more efficient in everything that we do. One of the examples I like to use is the life underwater. You see these ocean gyres, which are naturally occurring currents due to the weather patterns and so forth. And the thing that I wanted to point out here is the Pacific. There's a North and South Pacific gyre, but we see a lot of plastics in the water. I think everybody is probably familiar with this, but the scale of this is pretty enormous. So if you look in the Pacific Ocean, for example, there's a patch that's basically floating around. It's 3 times the size of France. Close to 2 billion pieces of plastic are in it. And the thing that's really interesting is as you go, as these degrade, you get from what they call the megaplastics into the microplastics that get into the food supply and so forth. And I think, again, you've probably seen in the news that plastic is making its way into pretty much everything in terms of our food supply and throughout the world. So big problem. I have a personal story. I went scuba diving a number of years ago in this part of the Pacific. This is in what's known as the Coral Triangle, very world famous for its diversity of sea creatures and the beautiful water. You see creatures like this, which I did, which is pretty fabulous. Also saw a lot of this. And a lot of this, and it's pretty incredible just the amount of waste. It's staggering, and this is a challenge that most people thought was impossible to solve, really, just because the scale of it. Well, here we have a aerospace engineering student, Boyan Slot, came out of TU Delft in the Netherlands, and he decided he wanted to make a change. And so, he wanted to address this issue. So what he did is he formed a nonprofit, the Ocean Cleanup. And maybe some of you have heard of this. It's been in existence for a few years now, but really what he wanted to do is go and get rid of all that plastics in the ocean. So he developed a system that looks similar to this with a tender ship that pulls it out. It's fairly high tech in the sense it's got lots of electronics, cameras, it has satellite navigation, and you can keep track of these things that basically float autonomously throughout the oceans, so they can keep track of them. It's somewhat low tech too, because really what we're doing is we're just trying to collect trash, and so they have a boom, and they have a system for doing that. It's been demonstrated to be quite successful. You can see from here, especially some of this legacy, they call it legacy plastic, which has been in the oceans since actually the 1970s. So they have a pretty good job collecting this. Also realize that really all of this comes from something like 1,000 rivers in the world, and you can see them sort of highlighted here. And so the idea is, let's get rid of this legacy, but let's not add to it. And so they developed a system to basically catch this as it flows downstream from the rivers, and particular things called the interceptor. And basically what it does is it funnels all the plastics into a particular funnel, if you will, and then puts it up a conveyor belt, and then it's disposed of. So a lot of good technology, both high tech, low tech, but really what I think this thing demonstrates is this is a student, who was in school that decided, I want to make a difference, and went ahead and did that. So I think this is where we need to encourage students to think that they can make a difference. All hope is not lost. These are huge problems, but they're not insurmountable. Okay, what's our influence? Well, we have engineering criteria. We accredit not just engineering, but computing and applied sciences, but I'm going to focus on engineering in this particular talk. But we have ways to influence what students experience while they're in school, and specifically at the undergraduate level. Programs that are accredited by ABET have to meet certain criteria. And so I'll just take you through these real quickly, because I wanted to point out just a few things. But, there's things in there, of course. You have to be able to do engineering problems. You have to understand mathematics, science, etc. And if you look at number 2 there, though, this is key, right? Because it says, hey, you need to not only understand the foundational, traditional sort of topics that are in engineering programs, but you also need to understand what's the impact of public health and safety, welfare. What about global, cultural, social, environmental, and economic factors? Okay, that's sustainability spelled out pretty directly. And so we are in the position of really telling programs, hey, you need to incorporate this, so that students, again, when they graduate, this is kind of just their natural thought processes. When I was an undergraduate some years ago, it was all about the technical solution. There was nothing to do with any of these topics. But 30, 40 years later, we're in a different world, and this is critically important. So I think in many ways we're developing a much more holistic and a better experience for students. And then there's other things in there about communications, ethical and professional responsibilities. Of course, that has a huge impact on sustainability as well. Again, we see there about global economic environment, societal context, again, all focused on the sustainable solutions. All right. And then finally, we talk about understanding and using data, et cetera, et cetera. So again, I think ABET's in a prime position to really influence what students are going to look like when they graduate in the future. Not only do we want technically competent ones, but we want ones that are going to have a real positive impact on developing sustainable solutions across the board. So, and then I'll put in just a little bit of pitch. We have our symposium coming up in about a month from now, Nashville, Tennessee, and we have a recurring thing on sustainability. This year, coming out of COVID, we haven't had this since 2019, so we're reintroducing it in 2023 now. And really, what are we doing to build a more resilient world? So, Kyle, with that, I think I'm finished.
Great way of starting us off this morning, Michael, and framing the overall challenge, but also, giving a sense of what ABET is, how ABET is moving forward with that, its ability to influence, to advocate, and to put in place, from your perspective, that pressure, and the draw as well on the positive side. To really incorporate much more fully taking on that sustainability challenge into the engineering curriculum. So if that's the sort of big picture and the influence that organizations that stretch across the entire system, like ABET, are doing. Next, we want to look at, what are individual faculty members up to, and to take a look at that in terms of what's the coursework and the opportunities for addressing sustainability within the context of that learning experience. Alessandro Ferzoco has agreed to offer her provocation to the group. Now, Alessandra is a assistant professor of measurement science at Olin College of Engineering, and really centers her work on impact-centered project-based courses and coursework that she's engaged in. So, Alessandra, I'll turn it over to you, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for the invitation to be here, and thanks, Mike, also for that start. It's helpful to hear a talk like that where the sustainability imperative becomes really clear, because it takes a lot of energy to do this work. So it's helpful energy to have injected. So can people see a slide?
Yes.
Yep.
Great.
Yep.
And while I'm getting all of my windows set up, I guess I would invite people to take 10 seconds to stand up and wiggle, take a breath. Actually, I have to restart that. Okay. So what I'd like to share with you today and get feedback on is a thing I'm calling sustainability and impact-centered education. And it's like those words sound nice together, but really what actually does that mean? And what are we thinking about? Where do we need help? And I'm totally serious about, you'll see through this talk that the work involves partners outside of our academic institutions. And so we are actively soliciting both your ideas and thoughts about what are the mindsets and skills that our students need to leave Olin with, and who should we be working with while we do this work. So I will start with what, ever since I've come to Olin, I would say maybe a third of my job looks like in the classroom. And I'm not a graphic designer, so I have to explain all the things in this image. You'll see a collection of yellow people. So in coursework, what I try to do is fold a classroom community together. And that classroom might have a title of something like thermodynamics. But for the learning experiences I want to create, I have to build a lot of trust in this community. I have to build trust between students, because we'll do things like do peer grading assignments. And when you do peer grading, now it's public information, whether your homework was done or not, or to what level you understand the topic. So before you toss students into an experience like that, they need skills and preparation to be ready to do that kind of work as a community. I try to wrap the subjects I teach in context. And so, for example, again, in a class that might be called thermodynamics is an effective vehicle to teach about battery structure and engineering, which has sustainability as a context in it. And the types of activities that I'll ask students to do are usually hands-on. And we've heard that idea before as a do-learn approach. So I'll ask them to try to build something often before I ask them to do the math that might be relevant to make their thing better. But what I hope you're taking away from this is that is mostly this idea that even though the class might be topically based, the type of work I do really is about forming this community and gelling this community, because for it to work well and for the educational experience to work well for the students, they need to feel safe, they need to feel trust, they need to feel like there's authority and there's value in what I've chosen to bring into this community. And I'll say in impact-centered education, this is a specific type of project-based learning. And what this does is bring a third party into our classroom. So that third party might be a corporation that we're working with. It might be grant funding or a group of community partners that we're designing with and for. And I'll say the difference that this makes to me in the classroom is twofold. The first difference is that community building and trust building is so much easier. It becomes so automatic. Now there's an external partner and the students go, gosh, we're going to make something and that person's actually going to use this. Help, can you help me, you teacher? And so right away, the relationship between the students are changed because of that, I think, that sense of need. And it's also leverage. Students, college students are so capable and they're so smart and they do so much work. And I really hope to find educational structures and external partners where the work and the effort of these very clever people can actually be of use to the world. So that's nice to say, but running classrooms like that, where there are third parties involved and external stakeholders, brings a design challenge, and the design challenge is predicated on two questions: who are the people and what are the projects? And if you start piecing apart those questions, you can start finding a whole bunch of quagmire kinds of questions that might that lend to making decisions about who you partner with and who you bring into the classroom. And so today, I'd like to talk about two specific examples. There are some courses we run where projects are initiated by external partners, and some courses we run where faculty initiate the project spaces. And I'll say, I noticed that there's chat coming up, and so I'd love to address the chat, but somehow sharing my screen today, my cursor has disappeared. So if Mike, if you would flag if there's something I could respond to into the chat, that would be helpful.
Okay, so far it's not, but keep going, Alessandra. Yes.
Yeah. All right. Can I look for your interruption if there's something I should respond?
Okay.
Thanks. Okay. So one example of a course, just so you get an idea of like what some of the details of these decisions look like for crafting these experiences, is Olin's capstone is corporate. One of Olin's capstones is corporate sponsored. We call the class SCOPE. It's an acronym that I've forgotten what it stands for. And this is the profile of companies that are sponsoring projects this year. And you can ask, where does this profile of companies come from? Well, I'll talk about, we're deciding right now who we're going to partner with for next year. And I want to give an example of 3 companies that I'll decide between. And the next thing I'll prompt is asking you for frameworks about how you might decide. So the first company is a small startup, and what they're working on is grid storage solutions, and a component of their solution involves lithium-ion batteries. So this is very captivating for students. Like the startup energy is captivating for students, but also hard to partner with because it's very intense. You have to figure out how you have permission for failure with a company like this. Among the students do need permission to fail and make mistakes, even when there's external partners involved. But solving grid energy storage has, on its surface level, kind of unambiguous, ethical, positive feeling to it. But when I put up the next company, this is a major corporation that is looking to shift into lithium-ion mining in Nevada. And when you sit these side by side, on the surface, it would be much harder for me to motivate students to work on the second project, or for them to really feel like their work is of value, because it's just much closer to the flip side of the ethical coin about what developing renewable energy technology looks like. The last company we're thinking about is an oil and gas contractor that is working on decommissioning oil wells. And so one of the projects would be about decommissioning, which I think is sometimes as engineers thinking about how we build, it's easier to think about how we build, and that maybe we often need to also think about elegant deconstruction. So I'll say in these 3 projects, there are ways, there's fascinating context. The way students may perceive these projects is different. Context on campus right now is that students are protesting our oil and gas investments in our endowment to color how they perceive which of these projects they work on. So I guess the questions that I run through, and I'm curious to hear feedback from you all, is like, when you're thinking about deciding where to draw a line for that you will or won't do, or deciding between options. Has anybody come across any frameworks or resources that they find helpful? What rights or entitlements do you think students should have in this process? And lastly, our students are your future colleagues. And so what experiences do you hope that they bring with them in the context of projects like this? So I'm actually going to unshare my screen for a second and let people take a second to think about the questions, and I'll invite you to put like questions that you have for me or responses in the chat. And we'll take maybe a minute to do this because I think we have some catching up to do on the agenda.
Thanks, Alessandra.
Yeah.
Alessandra, would you like people to maybe put their thoughts in the chat as well?
Yeah, that was the
Yeah.
invitation. And
That's the invitation. Okay.
yes. And I'll say I'm also I can't stop sharing my screen. So this will be nor can I right now. This is a fascinating zoo project. Nor can I right now exit out of
Let me see if I can help.
yeah. So what I might do is I'll change that plan, but at the end of the talk, I'll have to figure out how to stop sharing.
There.
Thank you. So I'm hearing things like no specific frameworks. It's been mainly case by case or having students group do the choosing. That I think is what Olin is experiencing. And I'll say to scale impact, that's incredibly resource intensive. When we have conversations on campus, when we're selecting projects, who needs to be in the room, there are staff and faculty involved, and students should be involved, and thinking about the mechanisms for that, having everybody in the conversation. Our current systems would really like struggle under the time commitment that takes. And so it's like, how do you efficiently involve when you're doing case by case basis? How do you efficiently invite voices? One person poses the question, why not all do all of them and create a metric? In this particular case, the reason to not do all of these projects is because these are the mechanical projects in our portfolio, and we have to match our projects to the skills of the students. So there are only a certain number of mechanical projects I can take in and have enough students that are going to be in this class. So the reason I'm having to choose one is not an ethical one, it's a practical one about skill sets for the students. There's a question, can students identify issues they care about and define the project accordingly? Is there an approach where they do the PBL without an external client, but by developing their own entrepreneurial approach? I think, so in this particular class that I presented, there is an element of student choice. We had 14 sponsors, and there's an element of student choice about which team that they're on. They don't get to explicitly choose, but we do a kind of ranked choice voting sort of approach. And I'm going to take that as a bridge into the other type of classes I was talking about, which is where they're generated from within Olin. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen, and you might have to sharing my screen. You might have to rest. Okay. So thinking about this other form of class, which was brought up, which is like, yeah, what if the projects are initiated within Olin, and that can mitigate some of these, the dynamics of how students have input. So another course I want to talk about developing, it's actually a triple wide course. So 75% of the students' time would be spent on this course. We would love it to be 100%, but I'll say there are issues for student risk when you do a 16 credit course instead of a 12 credit course. And the risk there is that students need to be qualified as full-time students to receive financial aid packages. And so there would be no way to drop a 16 credit course. With a 12 credit course, we can have safety mechanisms for students that need to drop. Again, when you're designing these, failure needs to be an option. So this approach was how can we, Olin has different faculty evaluation mechanisms than many other campuses. And how could we leverage that? And one way Olin can leverage that is through collaboration. So we had a neuroscientist, a computer scientist, and me who thinks about sensing and measurement come together and say, what is a project that the three of us could do together at Olin that would meet a need elsewhere, that meet an unmet need in the market. We have an acronym for the course. It's called STEP, and we say that it has a triple bottom line. Our goals are to provide a transformative education. We would like these projects to contribute to changing the financial model for higher education. So there is a product output at this class, and it's not the case that we might sell the product or spin off a company, but there are other ways that generating a product that has value on the market could feed back into what the cost of education is for students. And the last thing is to provide, the last part of the bottom line is to provide a social good unmet by current market forces. So if you put those three things together, those three objectives together with a neuroscientist, a computer scientist, and a measurement scientist, you get a product. What we're building is a controller and a software system that helps blind and visually impaired individuals become more independent by allowing them to more easily navigate to new spaces. And the technical challenge there is the last 100 steps of navigation. So we have excellent navigation tools that get you from bus stop to bus stop or address to address. But when you need to exit the subway at a particular exit and enter a building at a particular door and find the elevators, that navigation challenge is limiting to the independence of blind and visually impaired folks. And now there are tools coming online that we can integrate together through this controller and software system that would let us do high precision navigation both indoors and outdoors around objects that support that navigation. That project was developed through faculty sales kits, but with collaboration of the students, and the students are actually defining what that product is, defining the feature list, undergoing user testing. Students have a huge amount of agency in the project direction in that case. That's explicitly an accessibility project. Accessibility, I think, is a part of sustainability, but I was hoping here to crowdsource. If you think about environmental sustainability, I'd love to have put on my radar projects that you know about that sounds fun. Olin student teams excel in areas where excel at technical problems that hinge on transdisciplinary skills and require integration. We love projects that serve to illuminate all of the systems that drive our society. Projects are helpful when they leverage existing technology. And they can be projects that might not be profitable enough to capture the attention of commercial players. So for example, there are 12 million blind and visually impaired individuals in the United States, and that is not a market size that captures the attention of Google or Microsoft or Facebook. Although they are building out some tools that could support that community, they're not designed for them. And so they are ineffective for that particular community. I think I would love to take 30 seconds to collect some of these ideas in the chat, but then to help get the program back on time, I will just pause and say that's what I was hoping to, mostly what I was hoping to say. Thank you for your attention and your thought partnership. And if you have ideas about how to stir up some fun trouble, then I'd be happy if you got in touch. So thanks.
Yeah, it looks like thanks, Alessandra. It looks like the chat will continue to be a place that people can offer both responses to both of your prompts in terms of raising those possibilities for you, but also for others that are in part of our summit today in terms of their potential use as well. So hopefully continue to take a look at that. I think this notion, what Alessandra really, expresses well in the work that she's doing at Olin And, in her thoughts about this is how you can begin to see a significant integration of sustainability into the learning experience that students are having as they move through those programs, and the impact that can happen on those students, the agency that can be created, particularly through that project-based work, where potentially you can even come up with real things that are really implementable. But also beyond the impact on the students, I think the impact on the third parties and the potential of the change that happens when those students in the project base engage with those third parties and help them think through possibilities from a sustainability perspective on these projects that they've taken on. And particularly, I think I would highlight there the students engaged with the third parties having to wrestle with and really confront the ethical dilemmas that will inevitably surface as we move forward with this type of work, whether it's in the form of the ion battery versus the lithium ion mining, or lithium ion batteries versus lithium ion mining, and ethical dilemma confronting that, or in the case of the oil well decommissioning versus the oil production that had been there before. And how do you work with that third party, that oil and gas company, to help them or think through with them those possibilities? So surfacing lots of great stuff there, Alessandra. Hopefully the chat will continue to give you more more sort of responses to your prompts. And that can also happen after the session. I will note for everybody with regard to these PowerPoints that we will be making all the PowerPoints of our provocateurs and the work that we do here available on the ECL website after the session. So you'll have the opportunity to go back and look at some of those great questions that Alessandra included in her presentation on the slides. All right, with that, I want to move on in sort of our context setting in terms of sensing what's happening across the engineering educational system by consulting the customers of this educational process, if you will, the students who are going through this learning process. And today we have an opportunity to hear from three students that have agreed to join us on a panel, and I'll be asking a set of questions and engaging in conversation with them. The first of the students is Holly Rudell. She is a fifth-year PhD candidate at Yale University in environmental engineering. The second is Rajiv Carrera. He is a junior with a focus on robotics at Olin College of Engineering. And then finally, Beth Michael is completing her master's in civil structural at Milwaukee School of Engineering, and as well she is in practice now with Martin and Martin. They're structural engineers, and beginning her professional life in that regard. So those are the three students that we have on our panel, and what I'm going to do is just sort of engage in a conversation with all three of them to work through a set of reflections about both their own particular thoughts about sustainability and how it fits where they see themselves going in their professional practice as engineers, but also their view of what's happening inside their schools, so that we can get that sense. So with that, actually, the first thing I want to do is Holly, Rajiv, and Beth, is have each of you just very quickly introduce yourselves. If you want to add something to what I've offered there. So Holly, you want to add something to the introduction that I just gave you?
Yeah, definitely. And thank you, Kyle and Mike, for the opportunity to be here and meet you all today. So thank you so much. Yeah, as Kyle said, I'm in my fifth year, last year of my PhD program in environmental engineering, which has been really exciting. I guess the one thing that I will add to this conversation is that my undergrad degree was actually in chemistry and physics. And so I was doing a lot of fundamental work in my undergraduate degree. And part of the reason that I transitioned into engineering for my graduate school degree is because I wanted to have some of this closer to real world and people impact. And so though my undergraduate training was in slightly different area, I think that contextualizes kind of my desire to be in this space of engineering educators and professionals that are trying to move the needle even further and closer towards this impact and the impact it can have on the broader society.
Great, thank you, Holly. Rajiv, would you like to add something to the introduction?
Yeah, totally. So yes, I'm a junior at Olin College of Engineering, and I am studying robotics. And I'm very proud to like be on this panel with my other panelists who are both pursuing graduate degrees. I think that is like a very awesome like next step for you guys, and I'm looking forward to my future for that. I've worked in Greentown Labs last summer, which was a climate tech focused startup bank, where 500 different startup companies are working on this type of thing in the same space. And so I have some experience in those spaces, and I believe that I'm in the last stages of trying to work for a couple companies there this summer. So I do intend to like make some of my career in that like climate tech focused area. And I also do a lot of project management at my school, Olin. And so I'm running one of the project teams as the project manager, a team of 30 mechanical engineers that competes in the Society of Automotive Engineers SPA Championship. And so running a team and also like interacting with these concepts of sustainability on both an individual project basis and also on a larger organizational scale is something that I'm very interested in. But I'd love to talk about it more. But yeah, that's all I'll say.
Great, thanks, Rajiv. And finally, Beth Michael. Beth, would you again add to that introduction for yourself?
Yeah, so just to repeat what Kyle said, I studied civil engineering with an emphasis in structural engineering. And I've also recently started with Martin Martin in Denver, Colorado. And so I'm excited to be here just because my master's thesis was about sustainable alternate concretes. And in addition to that, I feel like I'm in a good position right now to kind of help students learn what it's like to transition into like a young professional career and what can be applicable and important to their education before coming. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, you know, with those introductions, maybe Beth, I'll stay with you and sort of ask my first question, and then we'll cycle back through the other members of the panel. You know, you mentioned the work that you've done with regard to sustainable concrete. You know, more broadly, if we started, you know, what's your perspective about how important sustainability is as an aspect of you know, engineering practice today and in the future? And you know, you can, you know, perhaps offer your sense of what sustainability means to you within the context of that answer.
Yeah, so sustainability to me is very important. I feel like it's it's a big upcoming topic, especially for the structural engineering world, where clients are now choosing to have more sustainable projects and materials. So I guess for me, sustainability is keeping a lower carbon building because building emissions attribute to about 40% of carbon emissions, which is one of the leading causes to the warming of like the climate. And then, sorry, what was the second portion?
Well, really, you know, I think you're getting it. You might just sort of, you know, comment about, you know, does it align? How does that align with your sort of personal values of how you see yourself as an engineer?
Yeah, so one of the reasons I wanted to go into civil engineering is because I saw that I was able to provide a greater impact for communities around me or even across the world. Like a couple of weeks ago, I just got back from an Engineers Without Borders Guatemala trip, helping a local Guatemalan community. And so with sustainability, I feel like from the construction industry standpoint, we can help our local communities or nationwide or anywhere just to have a long-lasting life compared to a world that's increasing, warming rapidly. So
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. All right, thanks, Beth. So Holly, your perspective as well about sustainability, its importance for engineering practice, both today and in the future, and that sense of alignment with your personal values.
Yeah, definitely. And a topic that I'm hearing Beth talk about and also has been coming up in a couple of these conversations is the impact that engineers have to the broader society is not just scientific, it also impacts people. And I think that to me is kind of the power and potential of engineering as a field, is that your science that you're doing in the lab or you're doing in your job doesn't necessarily just impact the lab. It impacts the people who are utilizing your technologies or the societies that are going to be using that kind of mindset. And so sustainability to me, I think, goes beyond just sustainable materials or sustainable science, but also includes the people aspect. And that to me is the most important part of engineering and why I kind of wanted to get involved in it. One thing that I didn't mention in my introduction is that I'm a part of the Center for Green Chemistry and Green Engineering here at Yale. And it's been a really awesome experience to be a part of the center, because I'm kind of constantly surrounded by a group of people that's re-envisioning what it means to build our both chemical and engineering society from a safer perspective. And when I was talking to Kyle and Mike about being on this panel initially, one of the things that I highlighted is that this example of like this train derailment that just recently happened in Eastern Ohio or Western Pennsylvania. What if there's a lot of complex factors going on in that, but what if we imagine that instead of carrying toxic chemicals, it was carrying chemicals that still provide their function, but are not going to pollute the air and the soil and kill all the fish in the river. And so that kind of real world impact of how re-envisioning a paradigm in which people are not being impacted by their reliance on safer chemicals, that is kind of the ethos that has driven me in this field of engineering.
Great, thank you. Terrific. So Holly, so next, Rajiv, your perspective about sustainability, its importance to engineering practice in today and in the future, and again that sort of sense of alignment with your personal values.
Yeah, so I do think that sustainability for me has gone like very similar to my other panelists. Like it's been mainly something self-directed in my learning, and I think that that's something that, like, for instance, I really am happy with like hearing about all of the work that Holly you're doing in green chemistry, because that is very similar to a lot of the things that we hear about at Olin in terms of like the things that we spend a lot of time studying, the different approaches to sustainability, which I do think has very much benefited my thinking on those areas. But I think that it goes a little bit deeper into how individual people at a place like Olin, where we do get to choose the neighborhoods of our projects, like we get to choose the areas that they're going to impact. And that means that students can choose to go deeper into sustainability or into these types of like sustainable development goal areas of interest. So for instance, I took a design for manufacturing class. And this is where I think that my experience differs a lot from Beth's experience, but possibly not as much from Holly's experience from the way that she was describing it. In that I think that Olin is a place that spends more time designing like solutions or like designing products, basically. Essentially like robotics majors or mechanical engineers or electronics and computer engineers. They're designing something. And so when you are designing something that granular, like I totally agree, Holly, that like it's all about the people that are the end users. And I think that the Olin engineering education has enabled me to focus a little more solidly on that, in that we spend a lot of time doing stakeholder analysis, and that really prepares you to grow this like consciousness. And so this consciousness of the people that are going to be using the things that you are creating, and not just thinking of it as the solution. And I think that that's been the piece of the engineering education that Olin has given me that I'm not necessarily sure is like has necessarily yet permeated to other engineering schools. But one example is that like in that design for manufacturing class, our final project was to develop an injection molded product. And injection molding is a technology that has enabled so much, like so many amazing products throughout the world, but it's also enabled a lot of that like same plastic waste that you were seeing at the beginning. And so it was just like we were talking about with the scope projects earlier, it was very difficult for me to reconcile. I don't want more plastic to go to the environment, but I need to learn how to do this. And so instead of making a toy that I knew would be thrown away, I realized that there were other projects at my school that definitely could have used something like that and would have some obstacle to surmount of like getting that manufactured, something like that. And so I talked to a couple of professors and ended up finding a project that could be helped by a part we could manufacture. And we were able to get that project much closer to completion at a lower cost to the professor. But that is a connection I think that the students are going to start having to be making more often of the sustainability. It is something that you learn about in school, but it is something that you must incorporate yourselves.
You're muted, Kyle. Kyle, you're muted.
Thanks. So Rajiv, it sounds like, that what you were just describing there, particularly with the plastics, in terms of your, having seen that as an issue that you wanted to dive into with its sustainability implications. You mentioned early in your remarks that at some level that was self-directed learning. Is that right? As opposed to showing up as something formally in a classroom teaching about sustainability.
So the project to make an injection molded part was something that was latent to the class, but in the lens of the rest of my own education, thinking about plastics and plastic impact, it was something like a bridge that I kind of had to cross, I guess, because if you can't say one thing, like talk out of one side of your mouth and then be making injection molded parts that are going to be thrown away with the other. So.
Okay, good. Well, Holly, if I could turn to you again, with you mentioned the green chemistry center and other things happening, in your school experience. Again, I'm sort of curious how much of that again was showing up in your coursework as embedded in the coursework, or how much of it was really self-directed and you were, finding your own path into addressing those types of things?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I will say that it has been mostly, from my observation, self-directed, of particularly looking at the undergraduates taking coursework. Very few, if any of them, are required to do any sort of these classes about exactly what Rajiv was just talking about. How do the impacts of the products that you potentially are designing, like what is their impact? That sort of thinking is not embedded into the curriculum as it stands. It is rather, if you want to take a class, here's the one class that you could take. And perhaps that one class might be a requirement for environmental engineering majors because they are environmental, but that environmental aspect is not at all considered across like electrical engineering or mechanical engineering, which, as we just talked about, have huge implications on the types of products that are being designed by these future engineers. And so me being a part of the Center for Green Chemistry and being an environmental engineer means that I have more exposure to those, but certainly across engineering disciplines as a whole, I don't see it embedded in the way that sustainability thinking and life cycle thinking, in my opinion, needs to be.
Great, thank you, Holly. And Beth, I'm curious about your perspective about this as well, in terms of, how sustainability has shown up in your educational experience, particularly, the emphasis on sustainable concrete. Again, was it more self-directed? Did it show up in classes? Your perspective.
Yeah, so I feel like I have a very similar experience with Rajiv and Holly, where everything was kind of optional and at your own will. So for us, we didn't get into sustainability, or I didn't get into sustainability until I hit my master's thesis. So we didn't really have any classes that talked about sustainable materials and design and construction. I think now they're just starting to push out more sustainable coursework, but it's all so new at my school, and everything's just at like free will. So yeah.
Okay. Well, related to that, and staying, Beth, with you just for a moment, what do you think your classmates' view of sustainability is? Is it similar to yours? Is it, are you an outlier, or what's your perspective about that?
Yeah, I think it definitely varies. So the civil engineering industry or coursework is closely related to the construction management coursework, but with that, they're more taught on a business aspect with money and how can things be made cheaper? How can we make the clients happier? And a lot of that comes down to what's the cheapest, easiest way we can do things. And it's not really thought about for the sustainability side of it. And with cheap, it comes with the more harmful environmental effects like larger plastics, easier concretes to use that do produce a higher carbon and things like that. So.
Okay, and Rashid, your perspective in terms of your classmates, where's their mindset with regard to sustainability, or your sense of it?
Oh yeah. Did you have anything else?
No.
All right. I think that my classmates have a very much more informed than the typical engineering student when it comes to areas of sustainability. However, I still don't necessarily think that it's going far enough. And I think that like you acknowledge that the problems that we're facing as an engineering community are very stark. And for that reason, even though I'm getting like far more than I think that any engineering student could have ever really dreamed of, I think that we're going to have to make it a little bit farther on that end of the spectrum. And what I mean by that is that I think that we're really going in the right direction. And I don't want to sound discouraging with this. And I actually just dropped a message in the chat about a couple of my course experiences, but what I will say is that the Olin courses in the very beginning of our education are very structured in giving us certain types of vocabulary to use to discuss interdisciplinary actions. And they're very intentional about telling you that this is kind of what the school is about. But then it's up to the students to kind of pursue these types of courses and deepen that area of their thinking. And I do think that people buy into it, but I don't think that people necessarily invest a ton into it. What I mean is that the courses that have really developed this sensibility within me the most were ones that I had to go out of my way to make room for in my schedule. They were like either experimental classes or like things that went very far in another direction. But it was less fully integrated into the engineering experience. And I think that, open project-based learning, I think that Olin is really going in the right direction with that. But I think that it needs to be more holistically incorporated, because I think that that's the only way that you can really get this type of, like, all of the learning that all of the student panelists have done has been stuff that we really directed ourselves. And if you give students more time for that, after giving them the vocabulary and understanding, then they'll do that.
All right, good, thanks. Holly, your perspective on this in terms of how you see your classmates?
Yeah, I think that there's this like interesting, maybe not interesting, unfortunate duality of like sustainability being incredibly important to the students, but them not necessarily seeing that importance being reflected both in terms of coursework and then also honestly in terms of jobs. So when students are forced to kind of make these decisions of like, I'm going to take this class, like Rajiv said, that's kind of outside of the like traditional engineering curriculum, which means that maybe they don't get a technical skill that they would have taken in another class. And then they go and apply for jobs where they're like, oh, actually, you need to have all of these other skills, but they're not necessarily listing these sustainability skills that you're gaining from these project-based courses. I think that's really unfortunate because it discourages students from wanting to pursue that pathway. And then again, to have that be reinforced of, well, it's not in the required curriculum, it in a way subconsciously devalues some of the sustainability curriculum. So I would say from a personal perspective, there's certainly a lot of motivation and push from the students to want to pursue these things. But if they're not getting that sort of like output pull to like, how is this going to help me in honestly my future career? I think that it, again, as I said, kind of subconsciously devalues it, which is unfortunate, and why I'm glad to see that these conversations are being had amongst engineering faculty and industry professionals like at summits like this. So again, to Rajiv's point, not trying to be discouraging, just trying to like catalyze some need for change, which is why we're all here.
All right. So I want to, go very quickly to each of you and just get your perspective, again, the definition of sustainability. We heard in Alessandra's remarks that she commented, as she was discussing the accessibility project towards the end of her presentation, that her view that accessibility is, one of those elements of sustainability, that we can define it broadly like that and have an impact. What's your sense of the potential impact that, if we begin to emphasize sustainability, you can also get at a broader set of, social challenges or issues that are facing society? If you look at even the bigger picture, I'd be curious about your perspective about that. And Rajiv, maybe, see if you have a sense of that.
Could I ask you to repeat the core essence of that question one more
Yeah, I
time? I'm
probably
not sure I caught
wandered a
everything.
little bit there in terms of the question. The core
It's okay.
the core question is really about how you see sustainability impacting change with regard to the larger social system, in important ways, such as the environmental or social justice or DEI or things like that. What's the second order impacts, if you will, of emphasizing
Yeah.
sustainability?
Anyway, I actually have personal knowledge on this because over the last year, I have as the project manager of my school's Baja SAE team, I'll give a brief synopsis of the goal of the team so you guys can understand what I'm talking about. But in essence, the Society of Automotive Engineers Championships gives about 1,000 schools, maybe a little less, one 10 horsepower engine, and they have to build an all-terrain vehicle around it. Everything up in the engine they build, or they buy the wheels and things like that. But so that takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of coordination. It takes a lot of money, and it takes a lot of people time and design time. And that means that that's a team that's spending a lot of time and effort and energy together. And so it's actually we do this every year. We design a car, we build a car, we fabricate it, we bring it out to a competition. And that is well and dandy. Everybody has a great time. But so this is something that Olin calls a project team. So a large engineering project team. These exist on campus and they have their own cultures and things like that. And the Baja team is actually the oldest team on the school's campus. And what that means is that it's an engineering space with a hierarchy, and it's an engineering space that has a history and that has culture and roles that are passed down from year to year and from class to class. And so this means that we are looking to a very good analogy to corporate engineering. And this has people have used this as oh yeah, this is fantastic organizational experience. However, in this organization, we have, because of this long history, some machismo. We had a culture that needed some change because we noticed during one of the leadership meetings that we had a very stark, when we look at the numbers, attrition of our female members. And that was because at a school where it's 50-50 in terms of male identifying and female identifying, when you don't include the non-binary people, of course, the fact that you can have 80% of the women choose to say that they're not comfortable in space and then have a very different retention rate for men meant that there was something wrong. And when we, as a project manager, trying to understand that issue and confront that within the leadership spaces of a team, really laid bare of the fact that engineering is not an objective space. The way that we engage in engineering can allow for certain voices to be amplified and certain voices to be silenced. And it was very important that we look at that, take it into account, and try to not necessarily itemize and number out everything, but make sure that we were having the voices that were previously not being heard brought into the conversation, that was the only way that we've ever been able to make progress. And now we are,
Okay.
I think, doing a lot better on that front. But sorry, that was a little long-winded, but I'm willing to go into it more later.
Yeah. Well, I think these things will also show up as we move through the exercises and
Yeah.
the rest of the day. Holly or Beth, your perspective about this, the bigger system impacts that an emphasis on sustainability could have?
I like that choice of wording of like the systems impact, because I think it really gets to the point of there are a lot of different systems that are in play that have forces and interactions on each other. And I think this, again, notion that sustainability is just scientific is kind of to ignore the impact that it can have on a lot of these different systems. So to me, sustainability is kind of a mindset of thinking rather more so than it is any sort of like concrete concept. And so I'm trying to think of how to like phrase this without totally jumping topics, but I mean, in the service of just time, I guess, if I can like self-promote for a second, our center just published a paper about kind of the overlapping goals between the green chemistry field, green chemistry, green engineering, and environmental justice. And again, if we envision a society that's not built on hazardous chemicals, how can that have impacts for communities that have been historically the most impacted? And I think that's just one example of many, as I said, with the, like, for example, the train derailment, like that is just one implication, I think, of a larger shift in the mindset. But I do think that it's important, and we talk about this in a paper a little bit, about how things can be cascading either in a positive or a negative direction. And so I think one of the benefits of incorporating sustainability into education is this kind of longer vision, like the bigger picture view of how our decisions don't just have one ripple effect, they have multiple.
Great. And, I think that, the paper that you're describing is right on the money with regard to, these implications that we're trying to surface. So thank you for that. Beth, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so for sustainability for me, it's thinking about the buildings that we live in and where we work and the roads and the bridges that we drive over every day. And how can we keep them long lasting, as well as reduce the harmful effects that it does cause the environment in 10, 15, 20 years, even now sometimes with buildings, and keeping them sustainably built to reduce the energies that it is used to keep them up. So for me, it's kind of like everyday living and the impact that we see in all of the infrastructure that we live and work with and are living in. So
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're probably at our time limit in terms of, moving on to the next stage. But I want to thank all three of you for your insights, for your passion about, the work that you're engaged in as, engineers or moving into your roles as engineers for society, dealing with those issues. And thanks for spending the panel time with us, but also for sticking around. Hopefully you'll be able to continue to sort of express your views of things and engage in the conversations with all the others in the summit as we go through the day. So thank you to each of you. So with that, what I'd like to do is move on to the first of our exercises. And let me introduce this very quickly. I'm going to again pull up a screen share just to get to the right place. Hold on one second. So given the context that's been laid out by our provocateurs in the panel this morning, what we want to do is now begin to leverage the group genius that's on the Zoom call here in terms of this exercise, and begin to surface both what you're sensing, but also what the possibilities are, making sense of what it might look like if there is a fuller expression of sustainability within the context of the engineering educational system. Now, the tool that we want to use for this in terms of the exercise is to take advantage of one of those great sort of strategic planning tools that emerged over the last 30 years. And it was the idea that, you can have a group create a vision for their future. And in creating that vision, it helps to be tangible, to have a tangible description of what it will look like when that vision, is realized. And Jerry Porras and Jim Collins, in a book called Built to Last, laid out an idea that they called creating a vivid description. And a vivid description it provides a vibrant, engaging, specific description of what an aspirational future will look like. So it really, and by being vivid, by being tangible, people can get a hold of it. It has that level of specificity. So what we're going to ask you to do in small groups is to take a pass at creating a vivid description for what it will look like when engineering education has integrated sustainability deeply into its fabric and values. So what will that look like? And, we don't have to set a specific time, but if you looked out, towards the end of this decade, and that transformation has really taken place, what might that look like? And in your small groups, we'll ask you, in order to expedite things, to comment and explore a number of particular dimensions. You don't have to do all of these, but these are possibilities. Pick 3 or 4 off this list. What does it look like in terms of the teaching experience? What does it look like with regard to other aspects of the learning experience that is going on inside the institution? What has been the impact on people, whether it's on demographics or other qualities or characteristics, and at whatever level, student, faculty, or other staff and stakeholders? What's happened with regard to culture, or what's happened with regard to diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, or research and innovation, collaboration, or another dimension that you choose. So in your small groups, choose 3 or 4 of those to explore, write down, just, open it up from a brainstorming perspective in terms of allow yourself to be creative in thinking what could an aspirational future look like for a particular engineering school that has really taken sustainability and embraced it and integrated into its institution. So your task when we turn you into small groups is to quickly introduce yourselves, but very quickly designate some small group roles, have a discussion leader, a recorder. The recorder should be using the section of the Google workbook set up for your group. That will allow you both to record what's emerging in your small group, but also to report out on the basis of that, those pages in the Google book. Have somebody designated to be presenter. It's always great to know you're going to be the person doing the talking at the start of an exercise rather than at the end. And then finally, somebody here to play timekeeper and just flag, how we're doing with regard to time. So we'll put you into small groups. It looks like we're going to use, let's see, how many participants have we ended up with, Mike?
Well, there's 38 currently on the call. So you want to do 7?
No, actually at 38, let's do 5. I want to have a few more people in each group. So we're going to do 5 groups, move into that. In your exploration, instead of 40 minutes, let's take about 35 minutes. In terms of the exploration, creating that vivid description, then you move into an analysis step. And instead of 15, if you can take 10 minutes for that. And you may not get through all those questions, but, particularly try and synthesize what are some key insights that you want to report out to your group. So overall, you'll have about 50 minutes in your small groups to do that. We'll come back from that, reconvene as a whole group, and then we'll take our lunch break. But do come back before we head off to a 15-minute lunch break. So with that, Mike, do you want to set up set us up and get us into the small groups, please?
Yes, we're ready to go. Opening all the rooms now.
Let me see. Yeah, Charlie's back. So his group, let's see, who was your presenter, Charlie? Lauren.
Yep, Lauren Short.
And Lauren's here. Okay, so we're going to get started, and what we want to do is to have brief report outs from each of the small groups. I want to acknowledge the material that you've put into the Google Doc is all still very valuable, and it will be mined extensively by Mike principally, but me to a lesser extent, but all of you can do it as well in terms of additional insights as we put together our report coming out of the summit. So even though you may not have time to report out all the great content that you've got in there, it is going to be valuable in terms of the work that we're doing at the summit. So thanks for doing that. Let's say what I'd like to do, have each group, offer 2 or 3 key insights based on their work envisioning that aspirational future with regard to sustainability and engineering education, which means probably, maybe about 3 minutes plus or minus in terms of your report. So that we can get through all 5 groups and then have a little bit of time for discussion in a whole group before we move on. So with that, Lauren, do you want to start us off with the working group 1?
Sure, I can do that. Yes, as you said, we have to keep this short. I just want to say that everybody in our group had really interesting ideas and it was a fantastic conversation. So thank you for creating these breakouts and giving us that space to discuss. The main things I would say that we kind of honed in on really comes down to this kind of de-siloing within academia and also between academia and industry in particular. And this would look like having much more sort of frequent and deep and meaningful connections between educators in industry and students in industry in the academic setting, where we can bring industry in. I'm speaking as an educator here, so the we is educators can bring industry in to really clarify and maybe demystify some of these preconceptions students have about what an engineer should be and what their skills should be and what an engineering career looks like and demands of them. And then kind of parallel to that, more interdisciplinary educational approaches. So this project-based learning and these open-ended things that the student panel were talking about to give students the flexibility to sort of figure out their pathway through an engineering degree and to create their own kind of internal motivations and understanding for why does this matter. And some of the specific things that we honed in on there were helping students understand why they need to be good communicators and why they need to have a strong foundation in the humanities and how that integrates into their technical education. So that's like, there are folks in industry who have clear eyes about why those are so important. And then students are coming into engineering thinking, I just need to be really good at math and science, and I don't want to have to do this other stuff, or I don't think it's important, or it's a distraction. So creating that connection more from the beginning of a student's education so that they are motivated early on and they don't see these kind of humanities courses or communication courses as a side sort of checkbox that they have to fill. We felt that that was really important. And then that at the very end, we started touching on how that actually moves then beyond higher education as well, that we need to create these connections and start breaking down these misconceptions in the K through 12 sphere so that students in middle school or high school aren't looking at the engineering career as, okay, well, that's not me because I might be really good at math, but I love my English class or I love history. So I want something that's more well-rounded, and engineers are just technical. So helping those students understand that like they do have an enormous role to play in the engineering sphere, that they have a lot to bring to that space, and that space is open and welcoming to them. But then I guess to kind of wrap back around, we have to follow through on that promise in academia, which again, in our vision as a team that was creating this greater connection and more transparency between the educational setting and the industry setting, and what is it that students are really putting all this work into, where are they going with that, and how is that going to play out? I hope I touched on all of our main points. There was a lot of wonderful things said, but I think that's probably covers enough of it.
All right, just want to give an opportunity for one of your other team members if they wanted to reinforce or highlight another aspect of your conversation that Lauren hadn't covered.
I'll jump in. I think as we were talking about sustainability, I think it creates a great opportunity because sustainability is such a complex problem to bring in all those soft skills plus the systems thinking and to really emphasize that as we, really try from both an academic and an industry side to really solve these wicked problems. So
Okay.
I think there's some great opportunities there.
Great, Carlene, thanks. All right, well, let's move on to group 2. And sounds like your presenter, Doug, if you're back, your camera's off, you're muted.
Not any longer.
Okay, thanks, Doug.
There you go. All right. Also, a really terrific group, diverse background in terms of careers, professions, and ideas. So we have a lot of terrific ideas. So what will the engineering curriculum look like in the future? So we pondered all kinds of aspects there. So I think with regarding the sustainability topic, which also competes with other topics like technology and change, that we feel that it's best that the future curriculum will have all these topics integrated into the current curriculum. Professors will be aware of the issues, will have it worked into the teaching modules and the classroom exercises, for instance. And it's really predicated on something that an earlier change lab explored, where with the president of the Colorado School of Mine had a perspective, is that there's only so many credits that you can fit into a 4-year degree, and you're not going to fit in more. So it's very limiting in terms of putting in all new curriculum. However, so experiential learning then becomes very important. We did also say that in the future, it'd be good to just start from scratch and reevaluate. Some of those courses that we feel are core courses, maybe not as important as others, like sustainability. So there might be some wiggle room in changing out the curriculum in the engineering undergraduate and graduate degree. So we also talked about how the importance of collaboration. Now we all do projects in college that require us to collaborate, but in this case, it's also to collaborate on a project, not only on the technical aspects, but to attempt to secure perspectives outside of our industry. It comes in terms of diversity and equity and inclusion, the ramifications of what we're doing, and the implications of that could be helpful. So it's probably changing the direction. The way I look at it is that when a professor gives you an assignment, says you have a team to work on it, it's some other criteria that we should be considering in addition to just the straight up engineering perspectives on it. So I think that experiential learning will be a way of the future. Then we also had a topic about other ways outside the classroom to learn. One is through internships and having those internships directed to maybe some geographies or projects that are maybe different than the makeup of the community where we are normally existing. So you get other perspectives in the world, perspectives in the country, and from all different levels of economic and racial perspectives, for instance. We think that would be very healthy. We also recognize that it's important for continuing education beyond college, and we'll always learn a lot just on the job. And so having content out there where employers can make use of it to expose their employees to all these different ideas will be critical to advance the ideas of sustainability and how they would be incorporated into what we do. It also, like the last group, I think had a little bit of overlap. We did have some conversations about, what is good design, and maybe some of that criteria could be debated and researched to maybe include other perspectives outside what is just a straight up engineering technical issues like sustainability and other diversity and inclusion ideas. So that was those are our key points.
All right, thank you, Doug. So again, just open it up for maybe one other comment by one of your team members if they want to add to what Doug has offered.
I did notice that most of this got typed in. Thank you to our other scribe. I was just going by my handwritten notes, but I see that most of what I said is in the notes in the live document.
Okay. Well, it sounds like we're good. Let's go on to group 3, and let's see, the presenter on group 3, Josh Elliott.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. So
I want to start, I think we focused more on the how rather than the what the future of engineering education would look like. But I think that was pretty deliberate because we kind of noticed early on that it's pretty difficult to envision a different future in any future, have you know, any realistic future. But we recognize that it's necessary to make the changes required to create a different future. So we did focus on how to get there, not necessarily what it looked like. And through that, we focused on teaching, learning experience, culture, and then collaboration with others, and with more emphasis on the teaching and collaboration with others, I believe.
Okay.
And our key insights, the first was the idea of sustainability is already a key tool in problem solving for every single engineer out there. We all do it. We need to figure out how to shift the focus from saving money to protecting and saving the environment. You know, every project has a budget, and your client has a budget, and you're working within that budget year on end to sustain your client's budget, you know, whether it be roads, and I think in the mechanical sense, engineering sense, you see it a lot more. I think you see more cost benefit analysis than in some other disciplines. Speaking as a municipal civil, you know, the most we see a cost benefit is usually in a loan application or something along those lines. And you know, we've kind of figured out what the cheapest way to do things is, and we can go from there. So we need to focus on how to use that tool we all already have of sustaining money and switch that to sustaining the environment. Our second key insight was that higher education facilities, the engineering private sector, and professional societies all need to work together to make changes on how sustainability is taught, and that the burden shouldn't solely fall on universities and professors at the universities. The big takeaway on that one was we've got engineers that are starting now or have been in the industry for 10 years that will be there for 30, 40 more years that didn't receive the type of education we're talking about forcing into the universities. And there's no way to make fast change if we can't get the working professionals now up to speed, and we have to wait 30 years for current students to take leadership.
Okay.
And then our last insight was to have more engagement in society for students in engineering, so that students know how their education ties into sustainability. And that's the age-old humanities and engineering education, I think. And then as a more of it and more hands-on day-to-day for the students.
Okay, great. Thanks, Josh.
Mhm.
Again, any one additional comment by any of your team members? And the window is closing. Okay, let's go on to group 4 then. Thanks. Group 4, the presenter is unknown. So
I'm happy to present. This is Parth.
Thank you, Parth.
So Kyle, we did not take your advice and identify a presenter at the start of the exercise. So here I go. I'll read out our vivid description of what this looks like, and then elaborate a little bit. So our vivid description is as follows. Incoming students appreciate and demand sustainability. Students graduate understanding sustainability and just naturally apply it to all engineering work done in their career. So as a first, talking point, think about sustainability like we do safety. It's just something that natural that happens in everything that we do. It's not an afterthought, and it's not, a separate category in itself. We think about safety in everything that we do. Another component of that is LEED certifications for buildings. There are third-party metrics and certifications that are, out there. They're known. Everybody knows about them. Can sustainability get to a point that's kind of similar to that? When we talk about, innovations around, for example, low carbon in concrete, is it possible to kind of present two options, the traditional option and then I guess the more sustainable option, if you will, low carbon, for example, and have, cost metrics that could be presented to clients that could help them make informed decisions that strictly are not based on cost, but, on a more holistic approach. And then also, we talked a little bit about internships and kind of having a setting where students have an opportunity to kind of work and be side by side the decision makers that are kind of going through some of these, like government agencies at the end of the day have a lot of regulations, specifications that private entities have to abide by when constructing roads and bridges and so on. But is there an opportunity to bring students and groups of students into that decision-making process and throughout the process so that it could be kind of baked in to the education system a little bit earlier on?
Okay, great. Thanks, Parth. I should note that that sort of lead piece that you identified, we do have sort of the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure, ISI, that has their certification process sort of following on the footsteps of LEED. But, then the question is, how do you even go beyond infrastructure and buildings to other technologies, if you will, that the engineers are, working on and helping create on behalf of society. So good. Again, anything else from other group members?
I'll piggyback a little bit. To me, when we talked about safety and leads, what we were really thinking about there is we have a roadmap for how those have come into being a standard in engineering. And we're talking about looking at sustainability and bringing that into that same kind of path. So we have a roadmap that we could look at and, model, so to speak, that would allow us to make sustainability as integrated as safety is, for example. And then on the LEED side, one of the points that was made was LEED certification became a driver for the clients to be able to say what we want, which then allowed the engineers, or in this case, the architects, to begin to introduce those concepts into their designs, because it was no longer just them wanting it. It was actually the folks with the money making that decision.
Right. Okay. Nice ads. Okay, good. Well, let's move on to let's move on to group 5 and presenter Robert.
Can y'all hear me? Good.
Yes, we can.
Engaging discussion. This was great. I know I'm going to miss something, so team follow up. So we kind of looked at the challenges that we're facing in practice and industry in the non-academic world, and really how the curricula and students can be prepared to help surmount these challenges, starting with cost. And some of our frustrations is breaking down the barriers to what is really rigid funding mechanisms to achieve more sustainable economies, more achievable sustainable ways of building. And I love the idea of bringing up the importance of life cycle cost analysis and early exposure to that way of thinking, right? Finding a means to make these things more financially viable, and importantly, having the language skills to communicate that to a very wide, diverse team that might be equally rigid in their hesitancy to find new funding. And find these things to achieve circularity. And we all kind of recognized how this is going to undoubtedly require interdisciplinary cooperation. Keeping in mind that we need to push this future forward financial feasibility analysis and stop discounting the human cost of inaction or status quo. Secondly, I think everything kind of rallies around collaboration here and identifying what barriers and how many barriers just exist at all levels. And it's interesting that, you know, us humans have evolved hundreds of thousands of years to work together, yet the systems often constrain us. So we highlighted the importance of having discussions whenever possible to help us share our visions, understand the feasibility of realizing change, and again, ensure that this is a cross-disciplinary conversation. And it was interesting to hear some of the thoughts on how collaboration can be stifled and encouraged at institutions, educational institutions, and finding ways to better incentivize collaboration from both educators and our students. And maybe this would require some restructuring of how instructors are assessed or tenured, and how institutions are accredited, right? The more collaboration, the more clout, kind of putting that on a pedestal rather than the old archaic ways of doing things. We also looked at, you know, how important it is to integrate rather, you know, historically non-engineering disciplines into the engineering sectors. Things like cognitive behaviors, you know, taking a look at the psychology, and given that we build infrastructure for human society, how are we going to integrate that psychology, sociology aspect into the engineering code, if you will? And, you know, there's so many amazing groups doing awesome work on this call and abroad. Let's have success through mimicry. What has worked? Listen to our students. And support those institutions that they have supported and that have brought them on a good path. And of course, we have, like I say, Engineering One Planet, ISI, some really good frameworks. Really important to everything here is, again, bringing greater diversity, broader perspective into the conversation, whether that's at education or in the engineering level, and breaking down barriers to entry. We talked about, you know, this walled garden of engineering. When who's keeping guard here? We need more folks in the picture. So finding ways to break that down through early exposure, sharing our social capital, and having that be a bit decommodified, and intentionally working with communities at all stages of problem framing and developing solutions. One thing that Alina brought up that I've really felt the calling is we don't have time to have all of these aspiring youth with a lot of energy to graduate high school, go to the 4-year, go get their master's, and then enter the workforce. Encouraging students to join when and where they can, learn, get engaged, and also provide learning to us elder folks that might be a little more rigid and could use that energy, that encouragement. And of course, find ways to achieve higher education as they will. And one thing I do want to carry on, at a youth panel last week, all 6 of the youth up there said, what can we do as professionals? Well, we can help fund high school internships, mentorship, cooperatives, so that when they are ready to graduate, they have a better idea of what's out there and the ideas at places for the containers for the ideas. And last but most important, everything revolves around system change. So let's make big steps.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Robert. All right. Well, you know, again, you know, and final comment or additional comment, group members?
Yeah, I'd like to jump in. Just for a specific action, just like the licensing exam requires questions on ethics, and often for many states continuing education on ethics, that I think you can kind of let me say force change in the curriculum by requiring questions on the exams for sustainability, and also, just like continuing education on ethics, require, you know, an hour of the 15 hours of continuing education on sustainability. Okay, great. I mean, you know, just there, Dave, you know, it's highlighting the system's nature of moving forward to a, you know, how, you know, sustainability will have that system impact, and the need to tie together
ABET and the accreditation perspective with the educators, with the students, with the, Lance, is here, and, the licensure piece in terms of how that, you've got that whole set of, or a whole set of players in the organizational ecosystem of engineering education that will need to be sort of, that are going to have to move together at some level here. All right, so one of the things that has come up repeatedly in your discussions, it looks like, and that's significant here is that issue of, DEIJ, diversity, inclusion, equity, and justice. And Yvette Pearson is part of the group here. She's the vice president for the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the University of Texas at Dallas. And I wanted to sort of allow her to share her perspective about that and how that looks within the context of this integration of sustainability into the heart of engineering education. So, Yvette?
Thank you, Kyle. And it's been really great to be part of the discussions. And I'm sorry I've missed Michael's and Alessandra's presentations. I've had a meeting with our president, and I wasn't able to join until the tail end, but I caught the student panel, which was phenomenal. Just to give you a little bit of background to add some context for the 3 slides I'll share. In addition to being VP for DEI, my background is civil and environmental engineering. I've been in higher education, most of that time as a faculty member and administrator for going on 30 years now. I think this is year 27. And I'm also a commissioner on the Engineering Accreditation Commission for ABET. And so I'll share some insights, though I'm not speaking on behalf of ABET. This is speaking as someone who works in the space. I served for the first 2 years for the American Society of Civil Engineers. They created an inaugural group called Mosaic, Members of Society Advancing an Inclusive Culture, which was responsible for driving the direction of JEDI for ASCE, which is a global organization of over 150,000 members. And so I had the opportunity to lead that group, as well as for 2 years prior to that time, I led the ASCE's Formal Engineering Education Committee, which was responsible for our global efforts to infuse curricula with principles of sustainability. And in that capacity, and many of those capacities, Michael Milligan and I have kind of followed each other around the globe, almost tag teaming on this message that connects sustainability, JEDI, and accreditation. So I'm happy to share some of that with you today. The last 2 pieces I'll share with you are outside of my university role. I have a podcast called Engineering Change, which focuses on exactly what many of you have been saying here today, the need to redefine engineering so that we are re-imaging who we see as engineers and what we see as engineering. D, as in de-silo our academic programs and our approach to problem solving, research, and design. And then fine-tune our culture and climate in our organizations based on principles of JEDI, so everybody has an equitable and inclusive environment in which they can thrive. So redefine engineering. As I go throughout, after I finish, I'll share some links in the chat. But I always start with the why. What's the why behind it? Because I think for a lot of people, when we start thinking about the sustainability, when we start thinking about, especially when we think about justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, or JEDI, it becomes a box checking exercise. And so even when we're doing our faculty hiring training, I talk about the why. So when we look at a study from the CDC that shows maternal mortality rates of the differences based on race, Black women are 3 times more likely to die due to pregnancy-related complications than other women. And that gap closes when we see a match between the race of the patient and the race of the doctor. When we look at a study out of George Washington University a few years ago, and I should say also, I'm a wheelchair user, so this really resonated with me. Wheelchair users are 36% more likely to be killed as pedestrians as other folks who are pedestrians. When we look at mistaken identity and artificial intelligence, people who are Black or people who are Asian or people who are Native American or Indigenous are sometimes, depending on the algorithm, more than 100 times more likely to be misidentified with AI, which can have, bearings on us being able to get into our phones, or something as tragic as being mistaken with the criminal justice system, which can be life altering. And then early mortality, looking right here, I'm in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. In the 76104 zip code in Fort Worth, people, their life expectancy is 67 years. And that community is predominantly lower income, predominantly African-American and Hispanic. And despite being located right across Interstate 35 from one of the largest medical centers in the country, the folks there don't have access to quality health care. And we can tie all those things to different sustainable development goals. When we look at the SDGs, we look at SDG number 3 related to good health and well-being, tying that into not just the maternal mortality, but the early mortality. When we look at accessibility of our cities and communities with SDG 11, we see the targets there that are focused on safety and prioritizing the needs of people with disabilities and other marginalized communities. With mistaken identity, reducing inequalities in the outcomes in society. And again, the early mortality here can be tied to a number of SDGs. I just put number 8 because a lot of what we're seeing in that community has to do with lack of access to work and economic growth. And as is the case with all of the sustainable development goals, they don't operate in silos. They are all interconnected in some way, and they can't be attained in silos. We have to come together with our different disciplines, our different experiences, and recognize and value the lived experiences of the communities, especially those of us who are marginalized in those communities, and to be able to bring together those different ways of thinking and doing and knowing to have a convergent approach to problem solving. I saw Dr. Beth Cady on the line from National Academies of Engineering. That convergent approach came out of an NRC, National Research Council report back in 2014 and has been pretty widely adopted by the National Science Foundation, and is really gaining traction. So I hear a lot of that in our conversations today. So what we did when I was leading the FEE, Formal Engineering Education Committee for ASCE, is my colleague Liv Hasselback and I led a workshop at an ABET symposium several years back, and we repeated it and took a deeper dive at some American Society for Engineering Education meetings to have engineers from a range of disciplines think about our roles with each of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals at different levels. Again, recognizing that they cannot be attained in silos and that we all have a responsibility to each of them. Whereas in environmental engineering, I might be tempted to just lean toward the clean water and sanitation or affordable and clean energy, recognizing that environmental engineers have a role to play in good health and well-being, eradicating poverty and hunger and so forth. And so with this particular workshop, we had folks think about where our individual disciplines are leaders, like this is our area, this is our lane for sure. Where we are major contributors, we have something big to say. We might not lead it, but we have a major part to play in it. And then places we are supporters. And that's actually where I had the privilege of meeting Michael Milligan many years ago, and having him engage in that session and hearing his thoughts as an electrical engineer and hearing so many other engineers come together and connect those dots and then extrapolate that to what that looks like in our curriculum. So in our group's conversation, we did talk about maybe we need to start from scratch with our curriculum, but just thinking about how these things show up in the curriculum is a big part of it. And then
So
from
I'm gonna just a quick time check here.
Okay.
Want to make sure that we move on. We've got a whole bunch more to do yet this afternoon. So
okay, I apologize. And so just
I know, I mean, the passion and the depth of knowledge and perspective that you have is very clear, but as I said, I'm just orchestrating the overall session.
Thank you. Well, and I'll give these slides to you once I make sure they're accessible to screen readers, but connecting the dots, looking at how we've connected it in ASCE and other engineering codes of ethics. We've connected it through policy, their connections through accreditation, and I can share some links to help connect those dots and specifically digging deep in the CE program criteria. And then also in some resources, and some people have mentioned Envision already a couple of times. It's a great resource for the classroom and so forth. So I'll leave you with that, but again, happy to engage.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, again, thank you for that. It's clear that, there's lots of stuff going on. You've got passionate leaders, that are moving this forward, and really it's a question, what is this going to look like when all of these passionate leaders at each level of the system are able to help create the change that's needed with regard to transforming engineering education. And that actually sets up the next piece of work that we want to do today is hear from another couple of those passionate leaders, or what we were characterizing as innovators in action that are actively trying to make this change happen through a couple major programs. And the first of those that we want to look at is the Engineering for One Planet program. That has been rolled out over the last 5 years by the Lemelson Foundation. Now, we heard the first of this 3 years ago, plus when it was not yet named, but it was environmentally responsible engineering. And then we've sort of seen it, become, a solid initiative with pilots that are really trying to, look at this potential and how it can move forward. So with this, we've got Cindy Cooper from the Lemelson Foundation, who's the program director for this work, with us to sort of lead a triad of people talking about this program. She'll be joined by Vince Nguyen from the University of Maryland, who is a senior lecturer with the University of Maryland, and Adam Carberry from Arizona State University. He's an assistant or an associate professor there. And both Arizona State and the University of Maryland are pilot programs that are moving forward, testing out, learning about the potential of this Engineering for One Planet. So with that, I'll turn it over to Cindy.
And Cindy, before you get going, just it appears like the earlier chat disappeared for some mysterious reason. I checked and I do have it in my Zoom file, so I'll be able to bring it back. So go ahead, Cindy.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much. It's great to be here. Yes, 3 years ago, my last presentation in the real world and face-to-face format was ECL USA, and we were just about to launch Engineering for One Planet in the pilot grant program. So I'm exceedingly grateful to be here again to talk about this and share some updates with you. I'll share my screen here. All right, and excuse me, I'm recovering from a cold. And as Kyle mentioned, it'll be me kind of kicking it off, and then I'll have 2 presentations with Adam and Vince, and then I'll kind of conclude at the end. So I've been so incredibly energized by the meeting today so far, and you're going to see themes repeat, which I think is a really good sign. So let's kick things off here. So for those who aren't familiar with the Lemelson Foundation, where I work, we're a private family foundation. We were started about almost 30 years ago by a prolific inventor, probably the most prolific independent inventor of the 20th century, Jerry Lemelson, who had over 600 patents. And our mission is improving lives through invention. And to do that, we support invention education, generating student impact inventors and other impact inventing support, supporting ecosystems and entrepreneurship. We've been committed to sustainability for a very long time, along with our long-term grantee partner VentureWell. And so the two of us started to catalyze Engineering for One Planet over 5 years ago. Before it existed, it was kind of more about a question, like what's going on? You know, students are passionate about changing the world, but they're not necessarily equipped with skills in sustainability, and you know, they're not learning those things as part of their regular education. Why is that? And although we catalyzed EOP, hundreds of stakeholders from academia, from industry and other sectors have helped shape the vision, goal, and the collaborative work of Engineering for One Planet. So the vision is that sustainability will become a core tenet of the profession. Others have mentioned this is what we need. It's just part of what it means to be an engineer. And to do that, we do need to transform engineering education to ensure that all engineers are getting these skills. But EOP isn't owned by anyone. It's a platform for change. I loved how Kyle put it when we were preparing for this session. He said, EOP sets a common vision and fosters self-organizing for transformation. All right, and so before we get going, I'm gonna, and don't panic, you won't have to actually answer these, just think about them. I'm gonna start with a pop quiz, a true or false quiz. Humans are a part of nature, not apart from nature, true or false? There's no sustainability without diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. Sustainability is the educational priority of our time, and transforming engineering education is still possible. You know, and if these are true, are we acting like it? As Michael Milligan said earlier, we need to change behavior. We might have beliefs, but it doesn't really get anywhere without change in behavior. So as others have talked about, you know, we have this beautiful planet and life on Earth is resilient, but it's also fragile. I'm ultimately optimistic about what we can do, but the truth is there is a lot of bad news. We've heard from some others. I'm going to repeat some of those messages. Like Yvette said, I like to start with the why. Michael Milligan talked about the biodiversity loss. Human life is also in peril. For example, the climate change is a code red for humanity statement. Michael mentioned it too. The UN said that a couple of years ago. And then according to many sources, pollution of a variety of different kinds is killing people every year, including 500,000 babies each year. And then did you know that it's also raining plastic now? This was first discovered in 2019 in a study in Colorado. And scientists have found as much as 81 tons of microplastics that had rained down in Auckland, New Zealand in 2020. So again, these are just a couple of examples. We've heard others, but it shows that when we impact the environment, we're then in turn impacted by it. And all of these environmental problems, as Yvette said, are worse for some people than others. Numerous studies show that people of color and people from historically marginalized communities face disproportionately higher risks from climate, from pollution, from toxins. So we really need to reprioritize our relationship with the environment and with each other. But the good news is that we have the knowledge, or we can generate the knowledge to fix a lot of these things. And the other really great news is that diversity leads to better sustainability performance. So we need to get everyone involved. It's important to environmental justice, and it's important for our outcomes. So sustainability is an imperative for improving life on Earth, but what does that have to do with engineering education, what we're here to talk about today? Well, all engineering activity, it can positively or negatively impact our people and our planet, but not all engineers are getting this education. And so not only that, it's an imperative for our youth. They're demanding action because their health and their futures depend on it, and they're making this a priority. They're asking for accountability from their education and from their employers in their career choices. Sustainability is also an imperative for industry. I think this is actually changing in a much more material way, even in the last year or two, where now there is evidence that there's actually going to be a shortage of people with sustainability skills. They're looking for these skills across functions. I can share some studies on this. And there are a lot of reasons for that. You know, one of them is it does make more financial sense, and it's being required of consumers, of institutional investors. And then sustainability is, you know, engineering education has huge reach, huge scope. So in the US alone, we're graduating 140,000 engineers each year, but then less than 1% of those have environmental engineering degrees. So you can imagine the positive impact we can have by preparing all engineers. Okay, so sustainability is an imperative and it's required by ABET. Why isn't it already integrated across courses more deeply across all engineering education? And before we launched EOP, so even prior to the 3 years ago, about 5 years ago, we did a bunch of research with stakeholders to figure out what was going on. Learned a ton. I'll just say, you know, we heard a lot of reasons. Like sometimes people would say it's impossible. You can't do it. And this is still being said. It's really hard or it's impossible. And some of the reasons are legit. Curriculum's already too full. We have to figure out a way around that. Faculty don't have the time, the resources, the knowledge. They didn't learn sustainability in their education. So how are they going to be able to teach it? They need support. And then when faculty do make changes to their courses, those changes fizzle out without the broader support from leadership and the broader engineering system from industry, et cetera. So we need to think about the question differently. You know, how do we go from isolated efforts that change engineering courses here and there to changing the course of engineering? How do we make sustainability a fundamental tenet of engineering? And we've been talking about this today, and I'm so excited about that because the answer is we need systems change. We need to address this complex system. These are some of the actors in the system, and they all have roles to play in the puzzle. All of you, I'm not an engineer. Some of you aren't engineers either. Some of you are. We all have a role to play in this system. So it's not just an academic approach. So that's why EOP seeks to enable everyone to contribute in ways that make sense for them. And because the system has perpetuated worse outcomes for some groups than others, we need to prioritize diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice as we work to change this system. We also need both bottom up and top down approaches. I won't go into all of them. We've heard this theme as well. It's not just about courses, it's about leadership support, regulations, industry prioritization and demand, et cetera. So these are some of the approaches that we've been taking in the last 3 years to catalyze systems change in engineering for one planet. EOP provides common language, funding, teaching tools, and other resources to support curricular change, and is also supporting collaboration for systems change. For example, academic, nonprofit, and industry experts co-created the Engineering for One Planet framework, and that outlines specific skills in sustainability and related professional skills that are needed to prepare engineers in sustainability. It's a menu of these fundamental skills that are needed. And it's been pilot tested. So we'll hear from 2 of the 5 pilot grantees that first used the EOP framework in curricular change. We've edited it since then. We've gotten more feedback from stakeholders since we first launched it, and a new version just launched. We've given other grants. The American Society of Engineering Education runs a mini grant program for Lemelson on this topic. We've given institutionalization grants to go beyond sort of pilot testing and seed funding to broader adoption within institutions. Adam and Vince will talk about that too. And then, we've got to bring people together to work together. So here, I'm just going to share a few highlights of things that we've learned. By no means is this comprehensive, but the framework has proven to be on target. People love that it's aligned with ABET accreditation and the UN SDGs. It uses Bloom's taxonomy, reflects industry needs, it's flexible and adaptable. And then it can be a platform for change because having common language enables things to spread more quickly. Faculty can share teaching resources referring to common language. Assessment can refer to that, et cetera. We've learned that support for collaboration is critical. We formed what we're calling a network, an impact network, people who have applied from across the system to work together in a committed way over time. This includes students, faculty, professionals, etc. But you have to be really intentional about making sure that you're getting diversity and supporting diverse sectors and voices and lived experiences. And we also need to make sure that we are supporting the network itself. So we have somebody who is a paid network manager. We provide travel scholarships to events, project support. And very importantly, movements move at the speed of trust. You have to prioritize building relationships and connections. Meeting in person for the first time last year accelerated things exponentially for the network. I'm not going to go through these, but we've learned a ton about curricular change. There are conditions that can be helpful in enabling across diverse institutions, but each situation is also unique. And we're going to hear the examples in just a second. So I'm going to turn it over to Adam Carberry, Associate Professor at ASU, and then he will pass it on to Vince, who's a Senior Lecturer in Mechanical Engineering at the University of Maryland. And then I'll come back and share a couple of thoughts with you at the end. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Cindy. Let me get this going here. You're seeing the presenter view, aren't you?
Yeah, we see your notes, Adam.
How about now?
There. Now it's good.
Perfect. Awesome. Okay, thank you, Cindy. So I'm just here to share a little bit about what we've been doing at Arizona State, and I want to recognize my collaborators, Molly Cash and Darshan Karwat, who's also on right now, and Allison Wolf. Share a little bit about what we've been doing here at ASU. And so we've had sort of two phases as being part of the pilot and then the extension efforts that we're making right now. In our pilot effort, our location was looking at how to integrate EOP into a core project-based learning course. So thinking about that pedagogical approach. And so the course that Darshan and I were working in is one course of 10 courses that students take throughout their 4-year curriculum. And so the course already had a structure around product archaeology, which is an approach that kind of leverages reverse engineering, dissection using an archaeological process in a final project. But we started to embed additional pieces that related to the framework. And so we took this simple object of a toothbrush, had students start to think about the social, environmental, technical aspects, how it connects to culture, and bringing all these pieces in through activities like life cycle analysis, material consideration, systems thinking, and design considerations. All of this is built to then lead up to students engaging in an open-ended project where we leverage the UN Sustainable Development Goals and allowed students to identify their own personal interests as it relates to those goals, and then to define what it is they want to try to do as an engineer as it relates to those goals. So we did a quick pilot of this over the course of the fall and then spring semester with some additional faculty. And one key thing that we did here is that we used EOP as a framework. We didn't start talking about engineering for one planet to students wondering, what is this framework? The framework was for us, right? To use that framework to design the course and potentially to impact the entirety of the curriculum for the students. So that's one of the key pieces you're going to see as I get into the second phase that we're working on, is how we are projecting this here at ASU as using it as an underlying framework for the curriculum and or an individual course. So this is just some really basic data that we collected from students to kind of get a sense of whether or not they were recognizing the practice of these various different concepts that are embedded in the framework through the course that we taught. And as you can see, generally speaking, the vast majority of students who engaged in this course had a large to moderate extent recognition of these concepts and things that they were implementing as part of an engineering course, which was really exciting for us. So what we've now done is shift into our second phase here at ASU. And what we're trying to do now is go beyond that. I just did this really cool thing in my course that Darshan and I did, to can we expand this to be even bigger here at ASU and to engage more and more faculty? And so this timeline that you're seeing on the screen, we've only really completed that first part. And I'm going to break this down a little bit for you, is to really start to find those faculty who are excited about trying something different. And then hopefully, right, those are our initial individuals that buy in, begin to build this here at ASU. And for those who are unaware, ASU is a massive place, right? It's got over 30,000 engineering students and is the largest engineering school in the US. So, you know, it's a major undertaking to try to get 450 faculty to take on this type of framework. So we're starting out small, and then hopefully that will start to be a seed to build things out here at ASU. So what we did was we had a recent working retreat, and I'm just going to kind of go through some of the things we did. We ended up engaging some graduate students as well, students who have passion for sustainability and are interested in this framework as well. Some are even, considering potentially going into academia themselves. And we were able to find 20 faculty who were like, yeah, I'm interested in being a part of this first cohort, this first effort here at ASU. And we introduced them to the framework. We started talking about their teaching philosophies, thinking about culturally inclusive pedagogy. What is sustainability education? How do we engage students? How do we design activities? And how do we evaluate that learning? And we took them off campus. So this was a really cool photo that we took from our desert botanical gardens here in Phoenix, where we really wanted to have an opportunity. And so behind this tree is actually Darshan and I essentially giving you a similar story that I just gave you already of what did we do in engaging people in a different way than we normally do in a classroom setting, taking them off campus, having dinner, and just talking a little bit about what we're trying to do in a really beautiful setting. And then we engaged them that was the evening before, we engaged them in a full day activity where we gave them opportunities to not only engage with each other, but to have opportunities to take some time and invest in the framework, explore it a little bit, right? Far too often, I think we go to these types of workshops and it's like, here's a bunch of information. And then you go home with all this information. It's like, now actually do some action, right? We actually embedded that in the workshop. And so you can see some examples here of some of our participants. Josh, I'm going to loop back to here in a second, where they're starting to think about the framework and how it does or does not connect with what they're currently doing in their class, and what sorts of things might they want to change in their classroom, and to do this collaboratively as a group. And again, as I noted, we engaged students. We did some gallery walk. So it's not just this individual, I'm doing this thing in an isolated way. I have opportunities to collaborate and communicate with others. And so ultimately this led to a little speed dating activity where all the faculty and students got to share their ideas and bring them together to kind of identify what they are going to try to do. So to leave this effort having built something off of this framework that we hope will ultimately be sort of an underlying framework for the entirety of the curriculum here at ASU. And one of the real interesting things that came out of one of the final things we did before I get to my final slide was we wanted to sort of get a sense of where people were when they first got here and where they are now. Right. And just from what you can see here in some of the quotes that people shared with us, right, is that now they're in a position where they understand that even in courses like statics and statistics, right, that concepts connecting to EOP can be connected into those courses, right? And these are things that we need to be thinking about throughout the entirety of the curriculum. This isn't just something that happens in a specific course that is called sustainability, right? We need to be considering this throughout the curriculum, and the EOP framework can serve as sort of that underlying foundation for embedding this throughout an entirety of a curriculum. And so my final slide is just to share this email that Josh sent us literally the day after the event happened. And he just really was so excited, wanted to share that this had an immediate effect on him. One day later, just having a different mentality. You saw one of those quotes before. People are like, there's a framework that should be underlying my course. Yes, yeah, books are built off of frameworks, right? Most people don't realize that. But what is that chosen framework? And so Josh, after having engaged in this activity, immediately tried to implement some of these things and already started to see an impact in his classes. And that was just a really exciting finding immediately from this effort. So this is where we're at in terms of the efforts here at ASU. And we're going to be continuing to do this work throughout the year. And we're hoping that this is sort of the seed for something much, much bigger here at ASU. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm glad we coordinated. We're not going to get into our workshop, but we've learned a lot of the similar things that Adam mentioned. So I just want to quickly talk about our approach at the University of Maryland. I think our two main themes to our approach here are the first element is to de-silo engineering. So to move towards more holistic solution approaches that include business, policy, and the psychological aspects. Because technology might play just a small role in terms of the most impactful way to attack some of these problems. And we want to do this in a way that's just more than just like an awareness of socio-technical thinking or systems thinking, but to empower our graduates to want to enact change by providing them with opportunities to do this as a part of their undergraduate experience. So that's kind of the first pillar of our approach. The second thing we want to do here was to look at our graduate product as a whole. So through the entire 4-year experience, what have we imparted on our students? And we really started to question what those isolated course experiences, those isolated ethics assignments, what does that really do besides check off the ABED box for us in terms of developing conscientious engineers and graduates? So we said, are we really graduating engineers that are going to seek out and solve these complex socio-technical problems that are out there today? So, not just the traditional having the skill set to do it, but having the gumption and the motivation to do so. That's the idea of agency, empowerment, and again, back to the idea of practice. So where are we with this? To be honest, we're still working on all of that. We're still working through all the challenges and hurdles that we have. And today's talk is not really to get too much into the progress, but maybe to share a little bit about the approach that we have at the University of Maryland. The one element, if I walk out here with nothing else to share, is maybe this. When we first started this, we were really looking for that magic bullet, that magic college or campus regulation, that ABED regulation that was just going to roll down and force all this stuff to happen downhill, to make it so easy. And what we found out is in all of our successes and even all of just our efforts in general, they related to just small, independent, ad hoc relationships and partnerships that we had here. So throughout this talk, I'm going to kind of have this little symbol here to highlight the different partnerships that we had that independently helped us do some of these efforts. So reaching out to the available agencies on campus really helped us kind of set up some of the possibilities that we had here. One example is Engineering for Social Change. We ended up collaborating with them for a book chapter about sustainability education. They also sponsor our our social environmental design impact award for our capstone class, kind of these random things that pop up with these individual partnerships that we have. So in terms of giving opportunities for students to do things, responsible engineering is a part of their educational experience. We approached that with a new class that we introduced here, Entrepreneurial Design Realization. And this is a class related to taking responsible engineering projects out into the public domain. So making something that'll go out there. That means necessarily multidisciplinary approaches. That means necessary stakeholder involvement and co-development with our stakeholders, necessary social entrepreneurship and the demonstration of impact. And all the logistics and all the hurdles and challenges behind implementation, the doing aspects, so that our students leave this with the gumption to try to tackle these types of things. Some example projects, I'll go through this quickly. This is an oyster farming project. It's major in terms of our local environmental and economic benefits. This actually went into the water at our research lab here. They actually pitched to a VC at the end of this for the product that they had here. Another project are these outreach kits that we send out. This started out with a partnership with Women in Engineering that we had originally, a bunch of sponsors as well. Thousands of kits go out. This is about 2.5-year-old program. Thousands that are going out there in partnership with our local school systems. Large culminating events we work with as a part of this. So 750 people we're bringing to campus and exposing them here. And the idea is education access equity. So we want to expose first generation and underrepresented groups to educational possibilities at the University of Maryland. What did our project group do? They designed, built, tested the next iteration of hardware and curriculum that was coming out here. They worked super close and tested this with actual stakeholders at campus-wide events. And they co-developed this actually with a bunch of teacher partners. So we had teacher partners that would bring their classes and we'd get feedback on our design ideas. And those teacher partners we got access to via our partnership with Science Technology Society, a Living and Learning Society, that were looking for ways to engage their teacher partners when they couldn't during COVID. So this is an opportunity for us to kind of leverage that partnership we had there. Another project, I'll go through this one quickly, is a therapy playground with a partnership with a hearing and speech department across campus. They have a early learning program therapy program, and we were redesigning their play space so that it would be better integrated with the therapy. That meant custom design equipment that they designed with the therapist and observing the therapy. These are actually in the ground now. Specifying off-the-shelf equipment and specifying tiers of pitches in terms of levels of the redesign. And in fact, level 3 is currently under review right now by facilities management in order to get everything all set and done with the playground. So another partnership we're working here with facilities management. We recognize that our solution was just a part of it. We had these individual pieces of equipment that were geared towards therapy, but that's just one piece of the puzzle of creating this welcoming therapy space for these young individuals. So we cold called the art department and say, hey, would you like to collaborate with us on this project? They're implementing a mural on the outside as well as implementing a mural on the inside. So here's just kind of a press release about that that we had there. So a bunch of different collaborations we had here. In the interest of time, I'm not going to talk too much about EDR lessons learned here, but I think one thing I will highlight is we need more individual partnerships in order for this to continue to grow and to thrive, in addition to leveraging the partnerships that we already have in order to make this successful. That's just one class, though. That's one element, one thing we had. We talked about mapping the entire student experience across the 4 years, and that means integrating course changes in multiple courses. So we approached that in a similar way as ASU with a sustainability faculty workshop. And this is about integrating specific course changes that we have here. The first workshop rolled out this January. It was a 4-day event. We had attendees from 5 different departments. 4 directors of undergraduate studies were there. Our associate dean for undergraduate of student affairs was also there, as well as student participants involved with this. We developed this very closely with STS and the College of Education in terms of developing the assessment methodologies that we had there. Just some things we saw here. We thought really carefully about what we should be incorporating in our curriculum, and we leaned heavily on the EOP framework to develop some of the major themes of elements that we wanted to add into our class or could be adding to our classes, with the addition of 2 other categories, DEI and agency. So those are the main themes of what we wanted to introduce in our curriculum. We did the kind of traditional map this across the 4-year experience to see where and what classes and what experiences we're doing each one of these elements, these major theme areas, and how well we think we're producing the results we expect out of our students in each one of these. And that helped us guide which classes we wanted to tackle for additional curriculum changes. Overall, we still need to assess this. This is another kind of aspect we're looking at. When we looked at assessment, we kind of unshackled ourselves from the university reporting and the ABEB reporting. We said, how could we measure this outside of bean counting and getting credit for it? And that allowed us to look at assessments that were outside of our traditional categories. That allowed us to look at indirect assessment, and it also allowed us to look at metrics that don't really look that good, but that might give us a really good pulse on if we're actually making a change or not. And we do all kinds of things. So we've implemented a 1st, 3rd, and 4th year cultural survey aimed at trying to figure out elements related to empowerment, responsibility, motivation, empathy, evidence of action in these surveys. We developed this in partnership with the School of Public Policy, and we've started to try to look at some of the results here. And we can ask interesting questions like, maybe I'll highlight this one up here. To what extent is it a junior engineer's responsibility to shape company culture related to social and environmental impacts, and to see how our students feel about that as they go through their learning experience. The partnership with public policy. DEI LOs. So these are not all of the LOs, but maybe I'll highlight the second aspect we have here. We want students to engage in DEI projects. So it's not just about learning about these elements, but doing with these things. So we can do things like track our self-selected capstone projects to say, how many of these self-selected projects have tied to environmental or social aspects? How many is tied to design for inclusion? And we can use that as a metric to see what the culture of our students are in terms of them trying to tackle some of these projects that we have here. I'm going to renote a collaboration with Hearing Speech in terms of developing DEI LOs. We were selected as an example of DEI LO integration for a university-wide workshop with this collaboration we have with Hearing Speech, just again, because we had a prior connection with them through the playground. I'm going to talk a little bit about redefining engineering. That was a topic that kind of came up a lot. In a class that's completely unrelated to sustainability, we asked our students there, can you provide a list of characteristics or skills that you think are necessary for a professional engineer? And we come up with all kinds of different things, and we mine that to say, hey, how many of our students are coming up with environmental, social, literacy, or responsibility aspect? How many are talking about valuing perspectives? How many are talking about empathy or ethics? And we're trying to see if we can move the needle there in terms of redefining what engineering is and what engineering work is within our students. Here's kind of a snippet from one of our big culminating events with our outreach. Again, we talked a little bit about K through 12 and redefining what engineering is to prospective students. And that's also, again, what we're also trying to push through this. Okay. In the end, I want to wrap this up quickly. We have a lot to still go through. There's still ways to go with all of this. Our efforts are really scattered, but they've been really made possible by exploring these scattered individual ad hoc partnerships. And we're going to continue to try to chip away at it here at the University of Maryland.
Great, thanks so much. Thank you to Adam and Vince and to your team of teams, ever expanding team of teams collaboration, so important. So I'm gonna just share a couple of things real quick here. I think the exciting thing is that we see that there's this groundswell. So I'm really optimistic about everything that we've been hearing and all of the momentum in the last 3 years. I mean, this is not just about EOP, this is across the board. This is happening, you know, in so many places and with pressure and with urgency. So that's very exciting. So back to our true and false questions. You know, I think they're, to me, they're true. I think they're true. And here are some ways to think about them. You know, when we protect the environment, we protect our babies, we protect ourselves, we protect our futures. And environmental issues are social issues. Diversity leads to better outcomes. Is this the educational priority of our time? Well, what's the point of education if we don't have a livable planet? And can we do it? We can do it. We are doing this, not just EOP. Again, this is happening all over the place, but we do need to go faster. There is urgency. And we need everyone to achieve the vision. We do need folks, engineers and non-engineers, to work together. We would love to have you be part of EOP. And, you know, one easy way to do that is to be a part of our signatories list and just join our community that way. You can go to the website, you can scan the QR code, and you can fill out a little form to say, you know, I care about these issues, and you'll appear on our Engineering for One Planet signatories page. It's easy to get started. We really would love your partnership on this. And together, you know, we are engineering for one planet. So thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Cindy and Nguyen and Adam. You know, the remarkable thing, I think, in terms of that, you know, that story in terms of engineering for one planet is in many ways, you know, at least what I sensed as we heard, you know, the story of the pilots and how they have rolled out, you know, you begin to see the potential of the transformation. Any number of the things that were brought up in small group as we were envisioning the future or creating these vivid descriptions actually begin to show up in these innovators in action. And now admitting not just there, but also in the great work being done, you know, by individual faculty members like Alessandra at Olin or you know, Lauren at School of Mines or other places like that. This transformation is rolling out, is beginning to happen. But the question is how do you know, move it through the social system in at a pace that really can make a difference for society. So the second innovator in action that we want to hear from is Jennifer Bradford. And Jennifer is the Global Business Strategy Manager for Education for Siemens Corporation, the major sort of global tech company. And they as well have put together a major initiative to really begin to help this transformation of sustainability within the context of engineering education happen. So with that, I want to turn it over to Jennifer and hear what they're up to.
All right, I'm gonna share my screen here. I think I've got it. Can y'all see my screen?
Yep.
Yes. All right. So first of all, thank you so much for having me. Thanks to Cindy for the introduction and to all of the other speakers. It's been really incredibly validating to listen to everyone talk today, from Michael to Cindy to all of the faculty, especially to the students, because in a lot of ways, being the industry partner in this space feels a little bit like finding a little bit of a trail of breadcrumbs, right? There's not a clear way to do this, and I don't know that there's particularly a right way or a wrong way to do this. So I'll talk a bit about how we have done this, how we've started, where we are in our journey to being a faithful partner to academia in this quest to build sustainability and skills for sustainability into engineering education. So on we go here. So there's a quote that I always think of when we're talking about this space, whether I'm talking to Cindy or Michael or the folks from ABET. You're not required to complete the work, but neither are you at liberty to abandon it. None of us will complete this work. I don't know that this is work that we'll ever consider complete, but it is incumbent upon each one of us to contribute to this work and to continue this work. So that always comes to my mind. So the first thing that we did when we decided that we really needed to be faithful stewards and partners in this place is to stand up what we call the Skills for Sustainability Network. So this has been thus far a series of events, we'll continue this year, where we bring together primarily educators, but also folks from industry across the world. We've done, I think, 9 or so of these roundtable discussions now, and just listen and hear what is it that people are doing, what are faculty frustrated with, what are, some of our industry partners, some of them who are competitors, some of whom are our customers, what are they doing in this space? Just what does the field look like? What's the landscape look like? Definitely see strong link between sustainability and employability. There's tons of overlap in what we have all day kept coming up as those professional skills or next generation skills, or what we formerly derided as soft skills. Sustainability, super messy, really complex, kind of the opposite of what we've always taught in engineering. There's not always a right answer. There are really complicated, really sometimes gut-wrenching trade-offs involved in this process. How do we help teach students realistically what those trade-offs look like and how they measure the value of those? Huge demand for this to be built in from year one. This can't be a bolt-on. It can't be something extra that we add. It can't just be a course in vehicle electrification. This has to be a fundamental mind shift. Faculty don't feel prepared. They feel that they and their peers need more professional development. And there is a huge demand for resources from industry, real data sets, case studies. We've got to tell the stories about the good things that are actually happening out there, because we've done a whole lot to screw things up. But we're also doing a lot of really innovative, cool things, and a toolkit to really address each of the SDGs. The next thing that we did was determine that probably listening to sort of something like an echo chamber of all the adults in the room, maybe not that great. So we sort of commissioned an analyst group to do a study. We weren't involved in that. It was all done at arm's length. But where are students on this? What is it that students have to say? So echoing lots of what our panelists said, climate change is the most covered topic, but it's not typically covered within the larger context of the SDGs, which were the second least covered topic. The circular economy, the least covered topic, but when I'm around my industry peers, that's the thing that we're talking about the most. So that feels kind of like a disconnect right there. That's something we've identified as a space we have to, to offer some good and to offer some help in. When posed with an open question, the top careers skills that students felt like they needed, coming back again to those so-called soft skills or 21st century skills, professionalism, communication, creativity. But really, disappointingly, all of the great things that we've heard the students and the faculty talk about today, as far as like real project-based or experiential learning in this space, only 22% of our recent graduates and 20% of our respondents in total, or that many, said that they had no experience in this. So again, there's a disconnect. We can really be helping to offer some meaningful project work. a quote that really stood out to me for one of the students who participated in this study and did a lot of work to socialize it through the organizations he's involved with. Students need real life applications, and universities still don't provide that enough. So people are looking elsewhere for those. Students really are taking a very proactive approach to getting involved, wherever they can. So talk a bit about some of the things that we are doing to address these early findings that we came to through the Skills for Sustainability Network and through the student survey. First of all, we got connected through the Skills for Sustainability Network with the Engineering Professors Council and the Royal Academy of Engineering in the UK. We have just launched a collaborative project to develop a curriculum toolkit, an open source toolkit. Eventually, anybody will be able to contribute to this. It is in the phase 2 right now, so the development work is just kicking off. Ultimately, what this phase will produce is a toolkit that addresses 3 key areas here: knowledge, skills, and mindset. All those things that we've been talking about today, so that feels incredibly validating. Cindy from Lemelson, who you just heard from, has been really, really instrumental in helping us kind of frame our thinking about this. We will be using, of course, the Engineering for One Planet framework for this work. Really, really believe in the work that they're doing and that it really creates such a flexible framework to work inside. So we're really grateful and excited to have that. Really excited about this work kicking off. We anticipate the beginning of the next calendar year, we'll have these resources available and out there. You'll be able to find those at the link here through the Engineering Professors Council. Next thing that we have done and will continue to do is support the Global Engineering Deans Council Industry Forum. This is an excellent, excellent venue for bringing together both academia and industry. Michael and I both participated this year. I had the good fortune to lead the group on that was looking at educational transformation. Some of the big themes that emerged from there, that micro-credentials are a real key in allowing learners to demonstrate that agile, timely, kind of flexible skill and proficiency throughout their career, especially as it comes to addressing things that aren't necessarily really at this point built into the core of the curriculum, like sustainability. Industry has to be involved in not only developing the curriculum, but also sort of providing guidance and mentoring to students in the workplace. And our friends at ABET and other accrediting bodies really have got to provide a clear path for the recognition of both sustainability largely and also micro-credentials within kind of the larger context of engineering education. I know there's some really exciting work happening in ABET to look at how to acknowledge other forms of learning outside of just the traditional degree program. So very excited to see more about where that goes. I missed one. No, I didn't. There we go. Very excited. Today is the first day I get to really talk publicly about this. We are also launching a new program with the great folks at Boulder as part of their engineering management online master's program through Coursera. We'll be offering in collaboration with them, a micro-credential on design for the circular economy, again, meant to address a lot of those key things we've been talking about today: technical knowledge and skills, the business of sustainability and circularity, and then what are the leadership skills, again coming back to those 21st century skills that we've been talking about, and how you really continue to imbue not only traditional learners but practicing engineers with this kind of mindset. So we are just incredibly excited to be kicking this project off, and especially excited to be able to partner with Boulder on this and to offer a credit-bearing micro-credential as part of their engineering management master's program. Finally, the last thing I want to mention, and I actually added this slide kind of while we were all talking, one of the things that has come up several times is this need to reach younger and more diverse. We couldn't agree with that more. So one of the ways that we're trying to do that is we have created a couple of different resources for that K-12 space. One of them uses Sammy, a penguin, to sort of really get that lower K-12, that primary school age folks interested in STEM broadly, and it uses things like ice cream and boats and the things that are engaging to kids to really just sort of touch on what is experimentation, what is the scientific method, what do engineers do. And then hourofengineering.com has just been launched. That's really more the middle school kind of space, that mid primary to secondary, and really, what is engineering? What does product design look like? How do I think and act like an engineer? There are teachers' guides for this, and this will continue to add modules to this and add capability to this. So I was not clocking my time, but I hope that I got all of this done in time, and happy to answer any questions you guys have.
You did great, Jennifer. Thank you. Any questions from anyone, both with respect to Jennifer and or with respect to Cindy and Vince, and what Adam had presented as well? Got time for just one or two.
This is Dave Soka.
Yeah, Dave.
Just on the materials from Siemens on K through 12. I don't mean to ask a nasty question here, but there's so much material out there already. I mean, what was the motivation for Siemens to create more material?
Honestly, it was just what we talked about. We keep hearing from folks that we need more attraction to STEM early on, and it's just the part that we decided to play in that space.
Yeah, just to let everybody know, there's a United Engineering Foundation grant that we're looking at to try to eliminate this duplication. I bring up the point that when you Google Marshmallow Bridge contest, you get 3 million hits. Just think of all the resources that have gone into duplicating all of that. And couldn't we have moved those resources maybe to providing honoraria to math and science teachers, or to provide scholarships to underrepresented minorities and women? So we're going to be looking at one of those topics in this K through 12 space is really first looking at what engineering societies are doing in terms of why are we duplicating stuff ourselves, and then reach out to others, because there are government agencies also, NASA, the National Science Foundation. They're also creating K through 12 material that is exactly the same as what everybody else is doing. So this is one of my passions, I'm afraid. We just are not using the resources as well as we can to try to attract more students into engineering.
Okay, I might frame this frame it in the other way around as well, Dave. And I think it's indicative of this summit is the opportunities to learn from each other rather than thinking that you have to reinvent the wheel yourself with regard to doing this work is really significant. There are, lots of good actors that are doing, engaged in good work here. And if we can have more learning from each other, rather than the reinvention, as you're suggesting, having resources that duplicate each other, I think that's a major theme that hopefully we're expressing in this summit, and that is part of that future. Is how do you get everybody in that, the 4,500 schools that ABET works with, institutions across the world, learning from each other in terms of advancing this. Okay, so I actually am going to move on to our last exercise at this point. And the exercise, let me screen share for just a moment. So the exercise is really designed to get at a point that Cindy actually raised in her slides. About a third of the way through her presentation, she had a slide that was looking at, barriers. And she began to list those, whether they were things like inertia or too much, faculty not having too much to teach and not enough time to do it, or the resources, or professional suicide, or, there was a list of things like that. We really want to look more close at this in the sense that, what we know in change, and this comes, these ideas were central to Peter Senge and Donella Meadows, who are looking at change from a systems thinking viewpoint, that, if you characterize, this growing action to create change, and, it can be seen as a reinforcing cycle or a virtuous cycle. You begin to do things and it builds momentum and more change is possible. But what they noted is within any social system or living system, there are always balancing forces or slowing actions that kick in, forces of resistance or inertia that slow down the change that you want to create. And so some of the art of transforming a social system is not only to focus on the things that are that you're making happen from a creating change and moving forward, but you also have to look at, how do I remove some of those barriers and resistances? And so we wanted to, use the group mind here to do a little bit of work in that realm as well this morning or this afternoon. And so the exercise will put you back into small groups. In small groups, there'll be an exercise. I've actually rephrased this in the workbook and reframed the time. I'm going to give you about, just a couple of minutes to introduce yourself, get the roles put, then about 17 or 18 minutes. And what I'd like you to do is identify what you think in your small group is the most significant barrier to change or point of inertia, or aspect of inertia that will get in the way of this sort of transformation within the context of academic institutions, and what could you do to overcome that barrier or begin to move past that inertia in the system. So 17 or 18 minutes to do that. A second question: what other actions do you think could help build that momentum? So that's the work, is to look at those points of resistance and inertia in small group. And then once again, a little bit of summary at the end of your small group discussion to, report out. Now, in this case, Mike, what I'd like to do is give the groups 25 minutes in their small groups and then be able to come report out. And I think we can use 5 groups. So if you want to set those up, that would be great. And I'll stop sharing.
Okay. Good luck.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, it looks like pretty much everybody. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's again proceed with a fairly quick report out. What came up in your small group conversations that you'd like to report out to the whole group as a key insight, something that seemed to be particularly important in the exploration that you were engaged in those small groups. So if we can start with group 1. Doesn't look like I know who the presenter is, but if you can step forward on Zoom, that would be great.
I think we're group 1, right?
Nope.
It's a group with Robert in it. I know that much.
Kyle, I think that I think we're group 1.
I think that might be us.
Yes.
Yes, that's right, Jennifer.
Okay, all right. So we are group 1. So number 1 insight was
There's both of you are Jennifers also.
Okay.
Jennifer Bradford, we're group 3.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
I was recognizing Jennifer Hedrake's voice, so I confused that.
Got it.
So it's Darshan, Alessandra, Mohammed, Jennifer, Hedrick, Robert, and Carleen.
So we didn't really pick a presenter. I don't know, does anybody want to volunteer? If not, I'll start off and maybe people can add.
Yeah.
Alessandra, okay. I would just like to say, you know, we had a fabulous conversation and we didn't get anywhere. So, but we had such interesting ideas and you know, both from academia and industry, and I'm from industry. But Darshan had a fabulous idea that in order to, you know, make a change, we need some proof points. We need working examples of why this is important, because material evidence is so compelling to change that it's, you know, almost irresistible. But if there is a resistor who's even with this great demonstration and proof point in front of them, they'll always nitpick the details, you know, to support their own resistance. But it's still, for a majority of people, I think that type of idea, you know, we need examples that we can talk about with real change and showing value of sustainability to, you know, overcome resistance. And we also need to realize that it takes time. And with students, they have their own time frame, and it should have been done yesterday. We have to save the world now. And they go into an environment with us old fuddy-duddies like myself, and it's a glacial change process. So I think that's another gap or area that we talked about that needs to be overcome. Anybody else from the group want to add anything? Did I do okay there?
You did great. I just wanted to bring up, yeah, Robert had a thought that, you know, we maybe need to talk more in the middle, because you know, it's fairly polarizing. And so if we can come to a middle ground, maybe we can make faster progress. We didn't solve that problem at how we do that, but
right.
Darshan, did you have something to add?
Actually, I was wanting Robert to maybe explain focusing on the radical center.
Okay, quickly, I call it the 3-star review model. If you look at the 5-star, it's a lot of, I received it, it's at my door, I haven't used it. The 1-star is it burnt my house down. So let's check out the 3-star. What broke? How can we fix it? Is this something due to installation error or somebody not following the instructions? A case point is I asked about fuel cells at our anaerobic digester, and they said, no, we don't want to do that. Well, it's based on one experience of a fuel cell installed 23 years ago. That was a very immature technology that wasn't quite appropriate for an anaerobic digester, and now we don't want to use fuel cells. So instead of using that 1-star review, let's break it down, right? Let's look at the 2, 3, and 4 stars and figure out what we're going to buy.
Okay, great advice. All right. So I will note, you know, just here, or no, I'll keep going. So group 2.
All right, I believe we're group 2. So we had good discussion. We talked about peer-to-peer sharing. So what actions could help build momentum, peer-to-peer sharing of topics, curriculum tools, work with and supporting early adopters to pilot these programs. We talked about a high school program that educates high school STEM educators, teach the teacher, and to provide incentive to continue credentials for education. So perhaps there could be something like that created for college professors, but that faculty would be need time and resources for, and how important it was talked about, how important it is to bring students into the conversation, not just a top-down design. They need to be included in the future. And then there needs to be a shift in the publish or perish paradigm. That research funding is a primary focus and teaching is secondary. That was something I heard earlier today too. And industry needs to make the point to institutions to include these courses and programs to help reorient priorities. And then if we don't drive this as engineers, then others will, and we won't have We'll just be in the back seat.
All right. Thanks, Nancy. I'm going to keep going through these groups in the interest of time here. So appreciate that report and the good work there. So group 3. That Jennifer Bradford.
All right, here we go, finally. So first thing, we really have to listen to and synthesize what it is that students have to say as consumers of our learning product, of our wisdom. Traditional universities face real serious competition with a more DIY approach that students are taking that include things like industry certifications and micro credentials that kind of meet their needs in a lot more agile, flexible way. And then how do we find a way to exercise power with those students instead of power over those students? We really need to examine our role as gatekeepers of access to high-paying careers, or access to the infrastructure of change, or access to accreditation of a program. At some point, if we hold too tightly to that authority over instead of with, it will simply vanish as students cease to be consumers of that learning product.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Group 4.
Okay, I guess I'll go. So I'll start off by saying we'll start with the problems. One of the problems is that there's a lot of interest, but there isn't a lot of forward movement. So the question is, how do we get that forward, that movement? We believe that there's a lot of resistance on the part of the faculty, not unreasonably so, because there is a zero-sum issue about how do you include new topics and new courses while you still have so much to teach. At the school that I work with, there's very few electives in system engineering curriculum. It's the system engineering and OR degree. And so there's a lot of stuff already. So what do you take out? People say all the professors profess to be interested in sustainability. In COSI, the professional society requires teaching it. ABET requires teaching it. And yet it doesn't happen very often. So, so there's a problem trying to get the professors to do it. And partly it's because as a professor, you're paid to do your teaching, you're paid to do your research, you're paid to do your publishing, you're out looking for new grant money. And, the last thing you want to do is spend more time modifying your curriculum, even on a topic like this. So, so there is this issue of trying to do it. There may be some issues with some of the faculty not feeling comfortable about it. But in general, it comes down to the two issues. I mean, you have limited amount of time as faculty, and you don't have money. You don't want to take away what you're currently doing, where you're getting money to go do something on your own to modify curriculum and to teach something different. Now, if the school would soften that and encourage it, maybe more would happen. If you go quickly down farther, what kind of change strategies? Perhaps there's a way to do it if there was a course, introduction to sustainability. So all the professors didn't have to modify their coursework, and this one program incorporated it. There's a belief that some of the courses that were required in the old days are no longer necessary. Calculus 3 was mentioned as one of the examples of that. So there's probably possibility of fitting things in now, but you have to go through the hard work of convincing your curriculum committees and the accrediting committees and your dean that you're going to change these and take these courses out to put in new things. And of course, if you say, well, we don't require Calculus 3 anymore for our degree, then the math department's going to complain that, you're decreasing their.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I think one of the things we also talked about was the importance of having credibility from outside. So like a Lemelson grant or something from Siemens or something from NSF. some type of grant funding is really important, and because it gives gives this change effort instant credibility almost, but also from advisory boards for programs and colleges. I think industry can also provide that type of credibility for these changes as well. So there are a lot of challenges, but I think there's a lot of we talked about a lot of ways that how do you gain credibility, and once you've got that credibility, then change is much easier.
Okay, thanks. Okay, group 5, take us home on this.
All right, great, no pressure. So we talked about in terms of points of resistance or inertia, we sort of talked from the industry side and as well as the education side. So getting clients on board, especially if you're working with local governments, there can be a lot of political opposition to change, as well as some other kind of practices that tend to favor the status quo in local governments. And in terms of education, same kind of thing. There's inherent resistance to change, but there's also a power issue, and there's a community for whom the system is working and has always worked, and they're the ones in power, and they don't necessarily want to lose that power because the system is working for them. And so that affects their resistance to change. So there needs to be conversations not only to encourage the change, but also to make it well known that it's needed for everyone, and not just the people for whom the system is not working. So we talked about a couple of change strategies. One was to do the sort of optimistic visioning exercises to get people really thinking optimistically about the future and not immediately go into this like doom and gloom that we all tend to kind of revert to, at least I do, when we're thinking about sustainability and the future. And then also in terms of more one-on-one conversations, really figuring out how to make it personal to the person that you're talking to, the one that might be opposing this work, and show them how it's going to affect them if it hasn't already. And then we also talked about partnering with people who are already influencers, for lack of a better word, or famous people who have some clout with communities, basically looking to see who's already thinking about this, who's out ahead, and partnering with them to communicate some of the needs for change.
All right.
And if anyone else in my group wants to add, please feel free.
Well, it sounds like it was pretty complete recitation of those key points that you wanted to make. So thanks for all of you in terms of that small group work and the insights about, how do you lead change in the face of resistance or inertia? I will note just from my seat, one of the things that we can do, engage in these sorts of efforts, is learn a lot from the, people like Peter Senge and Otto Scharmer and others who have really spent their lives looking at that question of how do you lead change inside a social system. And one of the insights that I come back to a lot with regard to situations like this was provided by a guy by the name of Everett Rogers, and he was he was looking at how social systems change over time, and this starts back in in the 1960s, and how innovations diffuse themselves within a social system, and we kind of all know this now. And what he noted was that innovations spread along a bell curve from the innovators, who are a very small percentage, 2.5, to the early adopters that are 12 or 13.5, eventually the early majority, late majority, and the laggards. And that if you're trying to bring about a transformational change within an institution like engineering and education, it will spread in that way. And that, in many ways, this summit that we're holding, we're dealing with the innovators and the early adopters, the people that are open to learning about the possibilities of some new change within the system. The really, significant piece, though, that Rogers offered and then was later codified by Malcolm Gladwell, was that you only have to reach 20% of the social system in order to be guaranteed that the change will impact everyone except the laggards. So you don't have to, you don't necessarily have to figure out, how do I get all of those faculty members? I mean, I'm struck by, 450 faculty members at Arizona State and 30,000. You don't have to get everyone. You just have to get the 20%. And then the dynamics of people, noticing what other people are doing, that tipping point will take you through. So, we can learn a lot from those lessons about change leadership that are available from people that have been thinking about this really extensively over 30 years and apply them to, the work ahead with regard to sustainability and engineering education. So thanks for all for doing that. Mike, being with us today. From my perspective, great work in the small groups, great provocations. Really appreciate the contributions by the students that were with us. Just, thanks to everyone. I'll turn it over to Mike for some final thoughts and comments from his perspective.
Okay, sorry about the delay. I just want to thank everyone for their contributions today. I will be sending out a post-summit survey, and we would appreciate your feedback. And I want to highlight our upcoming events. On June 20th, we will have another virtual summit exploring public policy leadership from the engineering community. We're working already with some potentially very interesting provocateurs on that topic, and registration will be available soon through our website. And then in September, we will be back at the Colorado Chautauqua in Boulder for the 2023 Engineering Ideas Institute, our 3-day in-person signature event. Again, we're working on the programming for that now, and we'll announce that soon. Colorado Chautauqua has proven to be a great venue for the Engineering Ideas Institute. Just a beautiful setting with lots of opportunities to work both indoors and outdoors. There's limited on-site housing available there. So if you want to reach out to me regarding an early reservation, you can do that. We would appreciate your participation in the Institute. And finally, we hope you'll stay engaged in our work. And if you are aware of other organizations or individuals that would be interested in what we're doing, reach out to me. I'm glad to have one-on-one conversations or to make presentations about what we're doing. Thank you again for participating today, and enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. It's great
Thank
being
you.
with you.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Mike. Good to see everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Thanks. Bye.